Hey, how's it going, everybody? I'm Nerd Slayer, the host of Thunder, episode 96, and I'm not wearing my fedora today. I feel like it. This change is coming to the in a good way, just in the sense that you'll see me on camera a lot more. So because I'm gonna be on camera a lot more, I have to get used to being on camera a lot more without. Bruh. It's been weird, but I don't know. It might be time to actually, or it might be better reserved for character nerds. The one that you see in all of my intros. Just saw hope watching the anyway, it's been I think a week since
Apathy is death.
like the first part podcast was saying hello, and then also saying thank you to APOC for subscribing to tier 1 subscription. Another audio is cutting out. How about now? Whoa, I sound really loud. Okay, is that better? All right, that should be better now. Okay, cool. All right, well, yeah, it wouldn't be a normal like 6 pixels under podcast if we didn't have to fix the sound in the middle of it. But it's been weird because my settings have been changing lately because Logitech came out with a new camera desktop software, I should say. So that's been changing my settings around. It's actually a big reason why I started later today. And then on top of that, my microphone has been kind of shitting out lately, so I might have to get it. What happens is like if the cable gets touched in any significant way, it starts crackling. Then like unless people tell me it's crackling, I don't know it's crackling. Kind of annoying. But we don't have a lot like to get to this week in particular. Like in fact, I'll start off with some of the less notable bits of news, which are Albion Online. Not that this is not notable, but it's just obviously not a big thing in the news cycle. Albion Online had a data breach. That's, been scary. I got that email and went and checked it out, and it's legit. They had a huge data breach. I think potentially a bunch of passwords got stolen. So that sucks. That's annoying. If you guys remember Terra, Terra actually, their original publisher said, well, I think it was actually their developer, not publisher, but their original developer, in Mass Entertainment, they folded. And so people were kind of wondering who's going to pick up Terra, basically. Well, GameForge picked up Terra. So GameForge is now the publisher for Terra, which is, scary, depending on your opinion of GameForge. In terms of other big news, like I think there was a little bit of mention of RuneScape 3 finally launched on Steam, and it actually didn't really get review bombed, which is pretty cool because, a lot of people were expecting it to get review bombed. In fact, if I pulled it up on screen right now, they're hovering at about an 86%. So not bad. RuneScape 3, 86% on Steam. Some people thought that the game was going to get review bombed. Definitely possibility. I think people were going to give RuneScape 3 a bad review, partly because of the microtransactions and partly because there's like obviously a big contingent of fans who don't like the newer RuneScape. They just like the older ones. I'm going to ask this before it gets flooded under a lot of messages. Have you considered making a Death of a Game about Defiance, the MMO that was linked to a sci-fi series on TV? Yeah, I have, absolutely. I just haven't because I've covered Tryon so much already that I'm trying to like go elsewhere, because covering the same company over and over again might not seem like it's that big of a deal, but in a lot of cases you're repeating some of the same story. So it just gets old. What a weird world we live in. Yeah, you could say that. Imagine something not being review bombed as news. Sort of the same way Guns 2 got review bombed by Guns 1 players. Yeah, for sure. I think there's probably some real criticism there, but that happens a lot. I know that happened in Dark Eden as well. Though Dark Eden 2 genuinely was not that good in my opinion. I still think there was some level of like, oh, it's not the first game, so it sucks, and that happens. RS3 and old school RuneScape have their own dedicated player bases. They kind of stopped messing with each other at this point. That's good to hear. I think it's kind of silly whenever developers, not developers rather, but player bases like feud amongst each other like that when they shouldn't, obviously. Awesome, thanks. I just marathoned the TV series with a friend. I got curious about the MMO as well. Yeah, so it's interesting to think. I haven't thought about like how many people have watched the show and then didn't play the game, and then went and played the game after. Like, I think obviously that's part of the intention of the show is to kind of attract people to want to play the game. But it's interesting that MMOs have actually been doing stuff like that since 2001, and I recently figured this out. I'm glad that you brought it up, actually, because I've recently been finishing, well, I've actually already finished my portion of the Death of a Game on Anarchy Online, so I've done the script and the voiceover part, and Tom's just editing it right now, so that one is the video that's going to come out next. Well, in that video, what I found interesting was that not only does Anarchy Online have story, like main story, it actually has a story that's based around an animated series, and I'm not sure, obviously, APOC is a big fan of Anarchy, so he probably knows this, but I wasn't really aware of that, and I'm sure a lot of other people weren't either, that there was actually an animated series that accompanied Anarchy Online, so that game came out in 2001, for reference. So it's crazy to think a game came out in 2001 that had an animated series. Now, is it a live-action series? Not quite. I still think that that's pretty impressive, that Trine was even able to get that on Sci-Fi Channel, let alone just, like, do it, period. But obviously the game itself had a bunch of problems, and I don't know much about the show, but I'm going to assume it probably wasn't that much better than the game. Yeah, there was an animated Anarchy Online series, and it came out like almost like 15, well, probably 15 plus years ago. So like when I used to say that SWTOR was one of the first like voice acted and story based MMOs, the same thing with Matrix Online. It's technically not true. Like Matrix Online's old, but it's not as old as Anarchy Online. It's a couple years younger, so yeah, Anarchy Online definitely pioneer. I'm happy to be awake to catch a podcast live today. Well, I'm glad to have you, Fly Termo. And how's it going, Card, by the way? Elex, I played and tried the game before the series, and heck, I didn't even know that there was a series. Huh? Funny. The show was good. I think it got a 7.0 rating on IMDb. I think that's pretty good for nerd fare. Like, you know, for like the nerd kind of stuff. I think that's pretty fair. Also, why do I look so damn bright on my screen? Like, I know I'm pale, but that pale. Let me lower my brightness a little. Okay, that was too bright. Okay, maybe I am that pale. I have to mess with it because Logitech now has this thing called Logitech Capture. It's much better than it was before, like the camera services and software. But I'm not familiar with it. Obviously, it just came out like I guess like a couple months ago or a month ago because it must have been just a month ago because I haven't seen it since like the last week. In fact, I didn't stream the last week because I had this shit and I was like, okay, how do I fix my camera? And then today I was just like, you know what? I'm gonna figure this out. And it ended up being something so silly that I needed to change or fix, but yeah, not used to this thing yet still. Logitech, please fix GitHub. Oh, G-Hub. I was like, what? Why is Logitech involved with GitHub? I was so confused. I played the second Defiance, and when the world events happen, I see around 20 to 30 players at the world boss, not including others doing their own thing, but it isn't a massive pop. So have you decided anything on moving out of US yet? I have, actually. It's funny you mentioned that. I was like thinking, I was like, shit, should I even mention it today? Maybe I won't mention it. You should really watch the show before you make a video about the MMO. Apparently the game was supposed to update alongside the show with characters appearing in different places and so on. I don't know if that necessarily means I have to watch the show, although I appreciate the sentiment, because to me, at the end of the day, I'm like militant in the sense that all I care about is the game and how it plays. Like I used to be a lot more caught up in like other things and like the story, the hype, and the graphics and like other things. Like I think like a lot of the other parts about MMOs used to kind of catch my fancy. But as I've kind of gotten older and I guess grumpier or something, like now all I care about pretty much is just seeing the gameplay for myself. Like I really don't care about anything else. Like, and I'm not trying to sound like that elitist person, but it's just like I've gotten my hopes up so many times. I've made videos about getting my hopes up. Like SWOTOR, my most watched video, is literally that, right? Like it was FOMO out the wazoo, me being like sitting there eating up every bit of information concerning SWTOR for 5 years before the game even came out, guys. You have to think I was playing Galaxies. So I knew about SWTOR for a long time before most people did. And I was alpha testing the game as well. So I had played the game years before anybody else had played the game. So like you got to think it was such a big game on my radar. And same thing with Guild Wars 2. I got to close beta test that game. I got to run tournaments in that game and close beta. Like these games I've had like such close relationships with. I've literally invested so much of my time and effort and energy, all of this into it. And so whenever I make my videos or I talk to people about sunk cost and when to leave an MMO, you know, like those kinds of things, I talk about it like an addict talks about being addicted to something, which by the way, I'm also an addict, but that's a completely other conversation altogether. The point being is like, that's how I talk about it. I talk about it like I'm a recovering addict, okay? Because I am. Like that's the point, is the Nerd Slayer idea is that in order to become a slayer of nerds, you have to become a nerd. So here I am, the MMO nerd, right? More so Shroud, but yeah, dedicated small audience, and the PS4 has Defiance. Second version, so they have those players as well. So those are separate audiences, probably just like Funcom did with The Secret World, which is unfortunate. I'll care about the lore if the game gives me a reason to keep playing long enough to care. Yeah, I think my thing is like, I know that people were so good at selling things, maybe because I've been in sales for a while myself, like construction, like, mind you, nobody's going to sell me on construction because it's boring to me, but I could sell people on construction. But like people were selling video games to me all the time, especially in the age where they were coming out like every weekend. So I was like, oh, this MMO on File Planet or Alakazam or MMORPG.com or Massively Joystick. Those were the websites back then. I remember I was like checking those out. Remember the MMORPG.com forums? I'm checking these places out like daily, looking at like, oh, there's a new game coming out this week. Then I'm trying out the game, and then I'm just like getting completely let down by the hype, being like, oh man, like this game just sucks, and then kind of realizing it's not as much as the game sucks as it is as much about my expectations are more fleeting, and they weren't developed yet. Not to say that a bunch of those games weren't problematic and all that jazz, but I think back then that's why I played so many of them. It's because I didn't know what I liked. So I just had to keep trying different MMOs until I figured out which ones I did like. And in hindsight, it took me kind of figure out which ones I really did like. How does a game feel, systems, and could give a fraction of care for characters? Voice, I'm assuming that's, I forgot what VO stands for. Am I just brain dead? Probably. Voiceover? Yeah, voiceover. That's why I'm brain dead. Storylines in an MMO. Yeah, kind of hard to type in general chat with a PS4 pad. Yeah, all of the Fantasy Star players in chat are right now like saying like, "Don't make me pull out my keyboard, bro." I remember I told you guys I had a keyboard on my Xbox controller. So I'm an OG, man. I'm an OG Fantasy Star player, and I'm an OG typing lightning speed on the Xbox. People would be like, "How the hell do you type so fast?" Well, I went and spent $20 to $30 on my little keyboard, which looks like a little like Sam or like a T-Mobile Sidekick. And yeah, that's what we used to chat on because that's all we could chat with in the game. It was basically you had to type it out, and it was a console game. So yeah, most people usually have that keyboard peripheral on Phantasy Star. Like if you were an OG, you had that peripheral. Like it's kind of like if you were like a real Game Boy player, you had the light, right? Right? Like in chat, like feel free to disagree. I'm curious, but if you were a real Game Boy player, come on, you had to have the light. How else are you gonna play under the covers? How else are you gonna play where you're not supposed to play? Addicts Rise Up. Thanks for the 100-bit donation, APOC. Gameplay should always be a top priority. Like, if I wanted a deep story, I read a book. Miss the old time of free, awesome MMOs. These days, it's all about making money in your face, or in the in-your-face way. There were so many of them back then, and so many different ones today. I used to play Rose Online, Fairy Tail Online, and Fly FF, of course. You need it. I'm in my yearly unable to find a new MMO phase. I mean, I feel like we always go through that phase. Like, all of us go through that phase. And I think that that's just like MMO players are long-term investors. Like, they're more likely to get invested into a game for the long term. So it's like, if you don't have a game you're playing long term, then you're probably going to keep feeling like that, you know? I could see that at least. I have no problem finding an MMO. Yeah, I mean, there's so many of them. It's not that it's hard to find them, more that it's probably hard to find one that is for you or whatever else. So awesome, I don't even know any of them. Yeah, Fly for Fun and Rose Online were definitely popular in the West. Like by comparison, those are names that I knew. But I also played a lot of Chinese and Korean MMOs, like more than most people, I think, for the time. And it was weird because, like, to me, they were such different audiences. Like, I've told you guys before, I wasn't the biggest WoW player, so like when I would go play WoW every now and then, or maybe go play the trial, or just go like listen to WoW players talk about the games, like I always felt like I was like living an alternate reality because I got to go play with games or players like that, and then got to go play with players that played, you know, Asian grind 'em up games, and then it just very different audiences for sure. And I still maintain to this day that largely um a lot of the problems regarding MMOs come from the fact that we struggle, and I mean we as in like all of us struggle with understanding that there's like it sounds so silly and stupid to say, but we struggle with perspective that other people can find other things fun that maybe we don't necessarily find fun. And this actually kind of goes back to my central point of like, and I say central point like I made it today, but it's a point that I make a lot, and it's a point that you guys hear me say a lot, and it's the Fox audience concerning MMOs. I think it's the biggest problem. I think it's the silent killer. I think it ruins expectations, and I think it's yeah, the silent killer for MMOs is, it probably has to be the expectations of them, right? Like that has to be another one I'd add as well. Like silent killers like that are like the ones that maybe you're not necessarily thinking about or seeing outright, but it's like if you have expectations that a game's going to be a WoW clone, that's actually pretty high expectations. And I think it was a big reason why so many MMOs failed, but your expectations then become kind of like set in stone of like what you expect a game to be. And so the problem of that, like the problem of the Fox audience comes like, how did expectations get so warped? It's basically because like, just like anytime you sell a product in any field, in any market, I think this applies. You have like the core audience that you sell a product to. And I mean, like, that's the person who's going to day in, day out really like support that product. Maybe they're the person who buys like a certain premium oil. Maybe they're the person who buys a certain premium cleaning product, right? Like whatever it is ultimately. This is your premium product person. And I say that premium product because MMOs aren't really like generalistic games. They weren't, they aren't. I don't think there's really good arguments there. They're more niche games, and they kind of are niche games. They have almost always been more niche, which kind of drives my point home here that when you're going after your core audience, right, you have to do innovative things to impress them. Because if you keep doing the same things, they think it's boring after a while. Right? Like it's kind of harder to. So in business, when it comes to sales, especially, it's much harder to like get a new customer than to keep an existing customer from the perspective of how much money it cost. But in terms of like ease of maintaining business relationships, I think this is debatable, but largely I would say that it's easier to maintain your relationships than to go get new ones, right? Or sorry, harder to maintain your relationship than it is to go get new ones. So to rephrase that, it might be hard to get a new relationship, or rather, I would say it how would I phrase that? I'll just say that ultimately, when it comes to like what an audience in a certain genre wants from that like game, or rather from that genre, that's a hard thing to quantify, right? So like, let's just like not even use the MMO genre. Let's use like, I don't want to use shooters because it's like broader. Let's use like the card game genre, like CCGs or TCGs. Like people have certain expectations of what that means. Like there's booster packs, there's decks that you can buy, there's tournaments that you can enter, cards that you can collect. Sometimes there's cards that you can trade if it's a TCG, right? Like there's certain expectations, and you start to ask yourself like, what are the expectations of like the MMO genre, right? Well, probably like a chat box, like some progression, the ability to join a guild. These are probably some things that kind of come to mind as more generalistic things. But the problem with those things are that any kind of genre can kind of have those things. And so like this is a problem that's been happening over and over again, where another game has like one feature of an MMO, and then everybody labels that game an MMO, even though the game has all the rest of it that isn't an MMO. So it's almost like MMOs have become basically, you don't have to have the sum of parts, you just have to have one part of it. So it's like you don't need all of it to add up together into some kind of like design for an MMO. You just need to have like a chat. You just need to have other players connected in the same area. You just need to have like, the goalposts got moved a lot. And while you can say that these are different styles of game, and I would agree with you, I think that the problem arises from basically now the expectation for players that are getting into the game is basically that the game is not going to be like an MMO should be. And like that sounds like a weird thing to say, but it goes back to my analogy about a different market. So whenever you buy a premium product, let's use like a hamburger, for example. When you buy a cheap hamburger, like you're not buying it with the idea that you're going to get something that's very premium, right? Like in fact, you're probably buying a cheap hamburger because you think it's good value, right? And so there's a lot of games that are like that. Like there's games that you buy when they're cheaper because you just want the value from it. But like a burger is a bad analogy because in this case, this is like a daily burger. An MMO is like a burger that you could eat daily, right? It's like it keeps giving you content. And so it's like, why would you want to invest into something that's like an inferior burger, right? An inferior product when you're going to be getting that on a daily basis? And then not to mention, if you're going to end up looking for that premium product, like the premium burger, is there enough of it to keep you interested? And I'm going to probably argue that the majority of people who are interested in burgers are more interested in that kind of burger. Again, I've eaten cheap burgers. We all eat cheap burgers. But what I'm trying to drive home here with some other analogies is that what somebody wants as a diehard fan, or even just a core fan, not even a diehard, a core fan of a certain genre, is not analogous to what everybody wants outside of that genre, or even just a genre in general. And so like it goes back to this, like, do TCG fans want the ability to trade cards? Absolutely. We nearly always have wanted the ability to trade cards. The problem is CCGs came onto the scene and said you can't trade cards anymore. You don't even own the cards. You don't even have full value of the cards. And then the problem is that people kept trying to say that those were the same kind of game. Those aren't the same kind of game. I always make it a point in my videos about card games to make the difference. There's a difference between a collectible card game and a tradable card game. And I should just use card games as an analogy. Apparently, it's a really good one. But like, to me, that's the point here, is that while they have a lot of similarities in the genre, they're not the same kind of game. And I think that that goes back to my previous point of like, you have people in the MMO world who are playing these grind 'em style like Asian games, and then you have the more blockbuster style like Western games, and they're just not the same kind of game, and yet they're in the same kind of genre. So it just, that creates a lot of confusion on what the genre wants. And who would have thought maybe the genre actually wants different things, and they want different things in different countries in different parts of the world. And that's true, by the way. MMO players don't all want the same thing. And so that, I think that that's the biggest problem with the MMO genre now in 2020, is it's full of players who aren't actual fans of MMOs. Like, this is not a dick swinging contest. This is not a, everyone's not a real fan except me because I've dedicated my life to it and I have no life because of MMOs. Like, as much as we are elitist players, MMO players, we are very elitist. That's not my argument here. My argument here is mainly that we have an entire genre that was created for a group of players who doesn't even really play the games long term, doesn't have an interest in playing the games long term, and they're not the main audience of the genre in general. So it's kind of like, imagine you're making a hamburger. Go back to my hamburger analogy. Imagine you're making a hamburger for such a small. I'll give you a good example, like a truffle burger. I've never had one, but like, to me, that's very like niche. Like, imagine you're making a truffle burger, but you're then trying to figure out, how do I sell a truffle burger to everybody? Well, I could tell you, you can't, because truffle is really fucking expensive. So like, you literally wouldn't be able to sell it unless, you gave less truffle or lower quality truffle. You see my point? Is that this is a concept in business that happens all the time. The premium good, if you want to sell it to a big audience, it has to be cheapened in some way, right? It has to. How do you sell truffle to a mass audience? You can't. How do you sell gold, like, for example, like to a mass? You don't. You lower the percentage of gold, right? You create another fool's gold to replace it. You don't just sell massive amounts of gold at lower prices, right? Like, that's not what you would do. So I kind of think of that's like what happened to the MMO genre, is like, the MMO, if it's like gold, it literally priced itself at a much cheaper amount, tried to sell to everybody, and then when it lost its value, it was kind of like, oh, well, I guess we can try to mint again, you know, like a currency would. But at that point, as anybody who understands a little bit of economics knows, you can't proactively just create the money and then be like, all right, we have the mint for it. In fact, that's kind of why we've came away in societies from using coinage, period, is because we don't actually have the real money for the coinage, right? Like, you know, America talks about being in debt, trillions in debt. Like, we can't actually like afford the coinage, right? Like, I mean, are there any countries that actually like back their banks up with coinage anymore? I know that has to be a thing somewhere in the world, right? Somewhere in the world. There has to be some country in the world right now who backs up their bank with actual like coinage. I'm sure that exists, but my point being is it doesn't really exist anymore, right? It used to be a thing where we could all say, here's all the silver we have for our bank. Here's all the gold we have for our bank. But it's almost like my analogy comes in here where MMOs are the gold, and we realize like we want to get more people gold, right? Just like you want to deal with anything that's like really quality, you want to get it to more people. But that's like, it ends up being this like age old, because it doesn't just happen in MMOs, is the point I'm trying to drive home, but it ends up being that age old discussion of like, how much of the soul of it do you lose in order to make it palatable for everybody else? And I think that's my biggest thing that I'm passionate about, is letting people understand that maybe the problem in the MMO genre isn't just the games, it's the people. It's actually like, in reality, the audience for MMOs isn't the same that it used to be. It's literally shifted. It's why people get so offended, for example, if I say that their game is more of a multiplayer online RPG than a massive multiplayer, because like their identity has become, I have to be a massive game, or I have to play a massive game, when it's like they're clearly not the same kind of game. And like anytime I walk through it with somebody, I often find that they can agree with me on that point, that ultimately, like, comparing, for example, Darkfall or Ultima or Star Wars Galaxies to Final Fantasy 14 or ESO, they're not comparable games. They're just not. Like, it doesn't take a nerdgen who's spent way too many hours and thousands of words like myself to figure that out, right? Like, anyone could look at these games and think like, whoa, this zone has a lot of players. This zone in this game doesn't have as much. Why is that? Is there a design reason for that? Is there a cultural reason for that? Yes. Are there other reasons for that? Graphical concerns, gameplay concerns, right? Like, is it a console game as well? You see what I'm saying? So like, all of these things start to come in, and if you ever ask yourself, why do MMOs and multiplayer online RPGs look the way that they look right now? Why does a genre look the way it looks right now? Well, it looks the way it looks right now because basically we don't really know who the audience is, right? Like, the audience has morphed so much that we still have games calling themselves massive multiplayer games who have less players than we had in 2001. So like, there's some problems in the genre with regards to labeling, with regards to education and understanding, like, what is this game? What does it mean? But I think the biggest problem is still the audience is just they don't quite know what they're getting into as much yet. And if you don't know what you're getting into, it's hard to demand better, basically, right? It's kind of like if you're not educated enough, you're not going to demand that you get paid more, right? You're easier to take advantage of. It's kind of like that kind of thing here. It's like, not that everyone's sitting around like, how do we take advantage of the MMO audience? It doesn't work like that. It's more that people see, this is working. How do we take this, distill it, and make money from it? And if you are tired of seeing the same style of game, then you should be banging the drum that, okay, maybe we should put our flag in the sand and say, what is an MMO? Like, what is an MMO? Like, is it this kind of game? Like, is it what they said it was in 1999? Is it what they said it was in 2001? Is it what it became in 2004? Is it what it started to become in 2007 through 2011? Like, that period of like WoW clones and stuff? Is it the period after that with a couple of blockbusters that failed, like Wildstar and all that, like Guild Wars 2, which is still around, and SWTOR? Like, you see what I'm saying? Is like, there's so many different ages and periods of MMOs. It's not the same as like a shooter to me. It just isn't. You play a shooter, like if I play a shooter from 1999, the concept is largely the same. I'm aiming, getting ammo, I'm shooting at people, I'm killing things, I'm beating a boss. There you go. It's like, how do you make a shooter a Fox shooter, right? Like, how would you make a shooter to the equivalent of what I'm talking about in an MMO context? How would you do it? You can't actually shoot at people. You you can't actually use your weapons. You know what I'm saying? Like, how would you make a fake shooter? I don't think you can. I really don't. Like, I'm trying to think in my head, like, you can say that a multiplayer game is massive multiplayer, has long-term progression, and lie about all of that, and people will eat it right up that it's an MMO. And yet, like, who eats up bullshit about a shooter being a shooter when it's not a shooter? You see what I'm saying? So it's like, yeah, is shooter as a genre way easier to define? Absolutely. It's way easier to define. It's like, you shoot and guns, you aim, like third person or first person. That's probably much easier to explain than a game where you can go both. You can do first and third person. Or a game where it's kind of a shooter sometimes, it's kind of an RPG, it's kind of a social game, it's kind of a this. It's kind like, MMOs are so broad because they're basically simulating worlds, which are very broad and complex in themselves. So it just man, I think about the period between 2007 through 2000, probably modern day 2020. I think that period, maybe more like 2009-ish, because there's still good games coming out in 2007. But right around that period, I think you start to see a lot of quote unquote copy style of games, and I think that's where it comes from. Is They basically started making games for the audience who didn't even play MMOs in the first place. That's kind of what my whole point is. Like, I know I ranted a bit and I took you guys down a couple of different pathways and stuff, but that's kind of my main point in the end is we have a genre that's made for players who don't even play the games anymore. And so like we have a huge group of players who are asking for this old style of game or this X style of game in 2009 or this style of game over here. And it seems as if it's like they're in the minority, but the truth of the matter is they're in the bubble. So they're actually the majority. They're actually the consumer base. And let me give you a good example of this. So I've seen this happen a lot in business and happen with pre-orders in video games where people will say, "Oh, my video game has 20,000 Steam wish lists." Right? Now, to many people hearing that, it's like, wow, that means you have 20,000 sales coming in, right? To any of us who've ever done sales, you know it doesn't work that way, right? There's a thing called like turnover, right? And it's like how much of that is actually going to turn into a good lead, let alone somebody who's going to actually buy the game, right? Like a customer. Probably not 20,000, right? Probably not 100% success rate. So it's like in many games cases, I've seen as little as like a 2-3% success rate off of, I guess they call it a conversion rate, right? So like a 3% conversion rate. For many people, they'd look at that and be like, wow, that's actually pretty good. That's a really good conversion rate. And so you think to yourself, well, that seems like it was worth the deal for me, right? The problem is like, if not enough people, let's say like 10,000 people or 20,000, I said, wish list, and then now 10,000 pre-order, how many of those pre-orders are going to refund, right? There's always something along the line where it's like, you're going to have the potential to lose that customer. Now, let's say you actually get that 10,000 customer base that you wanted to get or you coveted it or whatever. Imagine if that audience actually was like your core audience. Like, just think about that for a second. What if 10,000 people was your core audience? Like, what if a core audience didn't get bigger than that for the game? What if anytime it got bigger than that, and of course there's always going to be more than 10,000 players in a game of a large scale, but my point being is like, what if a game looked at it more of like, okay, we have 10,000 players, that's our core base. Let's focus on making them happy, and then we'll worry about everybody else. Oh wait, games already did that. Like EVE Online. In fact, that's why EVE Online survived that long, guys. It's like, that's literally what EVE Online did is, if you look at their early population data, nearly nobody was playing EVE Online for like a couple of years. They didn't care. They weren't trying to sell it to people who weren't playing the game, right? They weren't selling it to people who weren't customers. Remember my analogy? They weren't selling to people who weren't already in the bubble. They're selling to people who were in the bubble already. And so they slowly build that up to where now they're slowly attracting people maybe that are outside of that bubble. So now people outside of that bubble are getting involved and they're getting they're buying the game and they're liking it, right? Maybe who wouldn't have otherwise been interested, but it's slowly been expanding out. And it's kind of like another good example of this is kind of like a musician. A musician can have a one-hit wonder and have 1 million plays on Spotify or whatever platform, but that doesn't mean that they're going to make money or they're successful at all, actually. It's like a one-hit wonder. That doesn't mean that they even have a career yet, right? And so it's kind of like you have to develop your audience, your core audience. Like my Death of a Game core audience is my core audience. I've realized in a lot of mistakes I've made on my channel that trying to deviate away from that until I've really satisfied that need, with especially 2 of them in a month, like I'm going to have problems because ultimately my core audience wants to see Death of a Game. So like I could even use myself as an example here. And I think that this is like part of the problem is so many MMOs are made for basically people who don't really want to play the games. And so it's like, have you guys ever tried to convince a kid of something? Right? Like really like convince a kid of something? Like you almost like, you ever like lie to a kid like just to convince them of something? Like when they're like misbehaving or some shit? Like come on, I know everyone here in chat, you told them like, all right, if you go to bed now, like when you wake up, like it's like It's easy. Lempas. I've tried stealing candy from kids and it's easy. The point is like you can literally kind of tell them whatever, right? You can literally like convince them what you tell them that they may not know it, but it's for their own good. Okay, well, like now the memes are coming. I tried to convince, or I had to convince my cousin that he should not want an Apple phone. What did you tell him, that it had like worms inside of it, right? But you gave him actual hard facts. That's hilarious. But you kind of get my point. It's just like, how do you sell something to a group that's not interested in? Like, have you ever tried to feed a kid like peas when they hate peas? That's what I'm talking about, lying to a kid. Like, I have to, like, there's been times where I've fed, like, and I don't have kids, guys, but like, I've helped people take care of their kids. And I've babysat. And I'm trying to get them to eat these damn peas. And I'm like, how can I get a kid to eat these peas? They're magical. These are magical peas. If you eat these, a bean sprout will grow from your stomach. Surprisingly, kids like me think that's hilarious. Be like, really? I'm gonna eat a green bean, or I'm gonna eat a pea, or whatever, right? Like you have to like, or use those roasted peas and replace the crisps, and those are fucking amazing. Those actually aren't that bad, and the edamame ones, the crisps aren't that bad either. But you kind of get my point. Is like, how do you convince someone to like something when they just don't like it? It's like you literally kind of have to lie to them or trick them. Like you have to give them something that's not the same product. Like for example, I know a lot of people that say they love they'll say like, oh, I love coffee, or I love like chicharrones, or I love like X thing, I love this. And it's like, oh yeah, you love it? Like, what do you like? You know, like what kind of it do you like? And they're like, well, I like to put 1 gallon of milk, 2 gallons of cream, and then 3 gallons of sugar in my 1 cup of coffee. It's like, are you drinking coffee anymore, or are you drinking like filler? You know what I'm saying? So it's like, that's kind of what I think about. It's like the Starbucks approach. How do you make coffee this widely appealing but like controversial, I would say, largely kind of like thing popular to everybody? Well, Bard actually made a really good point. Apparently they just added a lot of sugar. Like they just like gave coffee a fuck ton of sugar and it made it appealing for everyone, right? Like, well, not saying all of y'all like it, so on and so forth, but you get my point. Like the general audience, like it got way more popular because remember, Starbucks wasn't this massive conglomerate from the beginning. It was a mom and pop place that got massive from making their product appealing for everyone. So it's like some MMOs could do it. WoW did it. WoW did the Starbucks approach. They made it fun for everyone, right? They made it fun for everyone. But how many other games failed at doing that? I mean, the list goes on. Like my channel's filled with them. Isn't that crazy to think about? I don't. It kind of makes me think about. It's like almost like, how do you make a sport exciting for somebody who doesn't like the sport? You know, like I don't like soccer. Like I'm not that I hate it or I'm hating on it, or football. You know, whatever you guys prefer to call it. I don't play it. I can kick. I can't kick a ball for whatever reason that well. Like, you know, it's not my game, right? I've never been the biggest fan of soccer or football. Now, how would you make it exciting for someone like me to want to play? Well, I'll tell you how they did when I was a kid. We did tackle. Like, threw tackle in there. Like, you can tackle the person with the ball. Then all of a sudden it was fun for me because now I'm playing football with soccer. You know, like, so it's like American football, I should say. But then at that point, am I playing soccer anymore? Or am I just playing like rugby or some shit? You know, like, am I playing like something different at that point? You get my point? And so like I bring up all of this and I really drive home my analogy to prove kind of like what I started off with, which is like the whole perspective of, you see how hard it is to condense an MMO into like a single idea, a single ideal even? Like, what does it mean? What does it stand for? It's hard. It's hard to do. It's not as simple as like, basketball is here and you shoot the ball and boom, boom, boom. That's the rules. It's not that simple, right? Because remember, if you change core rules of basketball, like don't allow people to dribble anymore, now you're playing Dagestani basketball, right? Which is like a different kind of basketball. Like that's like hood basketball. Like I've played that basketball as well. It's like you don't dribble. You don't have penalties anymore. That's not the same game, right? It isn't. It's a different kind of game. Not everybody's appeal or has an appeal for that. And so I think that that's kind of my main point, is at the end of the day, if you find yourself trying to make your general product appealing to a group of players who kind of shouldn't really even be interested in your product in the first place, it's a recipe for disaster. It's kind of like, I have a big problem with fusion food for this reason. You guys ever had fusion food? I'm not a big fan of it. And I'm not a big fan of it because I oftentimes find, like, I barely find enough Asian or Hispanic places I like to eat in the first place. So when I find a fusion place, and I'm picking on a place in particular right now that's like a Asian, like Hispanic fusion spot. And I had it one time, and I remember I just thought to myself, I'm like, this isn't even bad food. But what it tastes like to me is like, it's like kind of good Hispanic food and kind of good Asian food, and they mixed it together for kind of like subpar food. You know, it's like they didn't add to me. It wasn't like mediocre food plus mediocre food equals good food. It was like mediocre food plus mediocre food equals kind of like subpar food. And then I just end up asking myself, why am I eating fusion? If I want to eat Mexican food, first off, I can just make it, but like, why don't I just go get Mexican food? Like, if I want to eat Asian food, why don't I just go get some kind of Asian? There's many types of Asian food, but why don't I just get some type of Asian food? Why mix them together? Get me wrong, I know people like to mix things together. Hey, remember Fortnite? The whole concept of Fortnite was peanut butter and chocolate. Remember? It was like peanut butter and chocolate. That was literally how they came up with Fortnite. So I know that is appealing to some people, even unlikely combinations. But yeah. Rant aside. I think part of the reason they are games calling themselves MMORPGs is because they want non-MMO fans to play. Hub City RPGs don't market to the right people, and then the players get the wrong idea of MMOs. And that's pretty much my point, is it's like a hub-style RPG or a multiplayer online RPG. First off, let me say I love those kinds of games. And I actually think that they're better off being that kind of game than trying to appeal to an audience who clearly doesn't want them, like, to appeal to them. Obviously, you know, it goes back to my point about the hamburger audience, right? Like, you have your specialty hamburger spot, and then you have your, like, cheaper hamburger spot. There's not really a lot of overlap. Meaning, like, somebody who wants a premium hamburger isn't really the same person in that instance that's going to want a cheaper hamburger. The person who wants the cheaper hamburger typically wants a cheaper hamburger because they just want a cheaper hamburger, right? Like, I don't know about you guys. I'm not the kind of person who has the kind of money to really make this kind of statement, but I would say that, like, even if I did have the money, I'm not going to choose to buy an inferior hamburger just because it's cheaper, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If I had the money, right? Like, I've lived off of cheap, you know, horrible for you fast food growing up, you know, where I'm from. Like, not good. I don't advise it, but like, I've grown up on that shit. And yeah, it's like, once I got the taste of like real hamburgers, it was like, why am I eating this shit anymore? Like, I don't want to eat this shit anymore. It's like bad for me. Doesn't even taste good. And there's much better alternatives, including ones that I can make for myself. But anyway, it worked, right? Like, they were able to sell it to me. It was very appealing up until I realized maybe I just prefer specialty products. And I think that's kind of my point here, is that an MMO, like, just by nature, is more of a specialty product. And maybe it's just best not trying to Starbucks it up. But who knows? Every now and then a company will come by and Starbucks it up. And that will always make it appealing for another company to come by and do the same thing. It would be helpful to write clear-cut guidelines to define an MMO and just point to it instead of rehashing this topic so often. Thing is that it's not like anybody in particular is asking me to define it. It's more of like a, I would say, a discussion on the meta surrounding what you consider to be an MMO and basically what you consider to be the MMO audience, and largely why there doesn't seem to be a lot of agreement amongst the audience. It's because the audiences don't agree with each other because they're not the same audiences. Like, the kind of player who wants to play Final Fantasy XIV for the graphics and the gameplay or the story is not the same kind of player who's going to play Ultima Online for the full loot. Like, you know what I'm saying? It's not even the same planet of the same player. a nice innovation example is elimination back in school being played, and super fun for when we play want to play dodgeball, but only having one ball. But at that point, yeah, you're making a different name, different game. Yeah, actually, dodgeball is a good example because like dodgeball has so many different versions of the game. But I think that that's actually an appeal of dodgeball, right? Is that it's so malleable, and I think part of it is because there's no like official dodgeball league that has the official dodgeball rule set, at least that I know of, like in any significant way. I could be wrong, but sorry, dodgeball pros out there. I'm not familiar with your pro scene. Excuse me. Who knows, Limpos? I'm not trying to like shit on anybody's dreams, right? I'm a pro dodgeball player, okay? I just didn't want to admit it, all right? Go ahead and laugh at me, guys. No, I'm just kidding. I don't even think I'm that great of a player at dodgeball, if I'm being honest. Yeah. I'm like a big target, man. You don't want me on your team. I'm too easy to hit. Apparently there's a national dodgeball league. Of course there is. Wait, are you do you mean national as in like in Denmark, or like national as in like an Olympic kind of thing? Like maybe more international, I should say. Okay, national as in international. Gotcha. How have you guys been doing, by the way? We're about an hour in, and we've been talking about a lot of different things, honestly. There's not any big bit of data I wanted to get to today, except maybe Ashes of Creation released a creative director's letter that listed some of the testing dates. I can pull that up, and if my voice wants to not die, that'd be great. I don't need it to die, especially because I have a voiceover to do. So please don't die. Yeah, so here's the Ashes of Creation Alpha 1 playtest schedule, which I'm not going to be playing any of these. I have a strict rule set that unless I'm getting paid, I'm not going to play anything that's not a closed beta. Like, sorry. Just, if it's not ready in any capacity, I think me testing the game is just a waste of my time. Like, because people are going to hit me with the, oh, the game's not ready yet anyway argument, and or they're just going to say that, like, you already didn't like it, so you kind of lose, I feel like. Might as well just wait. Now, from the argument of, like, making money, is it good to do impressions and, like, cover things really early? Yeah. Because then, you know, I can be in the news cycle and stuff, but, like, obviously I'm not as interested in telling you my impressions from the pre-test 1, then the pre-test 2, then the pre-test 3. You get what I'm saying? Like, to me, the differences in those builds could be big, but I'm not interested in telling you the differences between the 3 different pre-test Alpha 1 builds, right? I'll tell you what closed beta feels like. I'll tell you what a finished product feels like. Brews nerds some tea. Thank you. I need some, actually. Really. I need something for my throat. It's just alpha, bro. Exactly. And that's why, like, I hate doing any kind of, like, early access, like, alpha kind of review. Is like, the arguments just become it's not ready yet. And it's like, fair enough, it isn't, but it's like, then what's the point of me even reviewing the game in the first place? Like, see my point is, like, it's going to be met with it's not ready yet anyway. So it's like, I'll wait until people tell me, hey, Nerdslayer, come play Ashes of Creation. It's a game that's ready for you. And trust me, people will. They always do. And when that time happens, I'm going to pick up, you know, my keyboard, or I'm going to pick up my mouse and keyboard, and I'm going to go straight to their website. I'm going to look at their dates, see when the closed beta is, see when I can first start playing the game. And then I'm going to dive in, and I'm going to start playing the game and giving you guys my impressions on it. But until that point, yeah, as much as I want to talk about alphas and stuff like that, and definitely cover them because it is news, and it is important, I'm kind of getting to the point now where it's just like, more than it's ever been, I think. I really just don't care about alphas anymore. I'm not interested in doing them. You could talk about being alpha. Did y'all see my tweet the other day when I was like, hey everybody, my name is fake avatar, fake name on Twitter, and I have a really bad take about how if you block me, you're a special snowflake. Just because I'm so alpha. I'm the alphaest alpha that ever alphaed. Like whenever I sweat, literally it's kind of like, you guys know Captain America when he takes that serum? When I sweat, they literally just, you could just drink it right up and it's like a serum. Pantheon is greater than Ashes of Creation. Pantheon's recent Alpha 700 update. Speaking of which, like, that's another thing is like, can we get some chat and like some conversations, like some dialogue, some discourse about what are your guys' opinions about getting updates from like developers? Because like, obviously, you know, I'm working on a game, Card and actually in chat's working on it as well, and like we kind of have the perspective of like only show something if it's really worth showing. But there's a lot of developers that kind of have the perspective, especially when they're trying to get funding, by the way, or keep funders happy, or rather, the people who funded the game happy. It almost like this, like I think the worst at it was probably Camelot Unchained, where like you'll get like 700 updates in a week, but then you try to like seriously remember what a single one of those updates were, and you cannot remember what it is. And it's like you feel bad because you're just like, I get that you guys are doing your job and you're talking about the stuff that you're working on, but it's kind of like, I think developers have to understand, like, you need to know how to read the room. Like, do you guys go into random rooms and just start talking about your favorite MMO? I do. No, I'm just kidding. No, I don't do that. And even I love MMO so much, it's hard for me not to want to talk about them all the time. But I don't go into jujitsu class and I'm like, hey, so WoW was actually like the first MMO. Just kidding. It actually started this whole trend of like copycat MMOs and like Like, nobody fucking cares. Like maybe somebody cares in the room, maybe somebody. Okay, maybe like one or two people. But like realistically, like unless I read the room, nobody cares, right? So like it's that's the only thing that they have done for us. But like I feel like developers just have to understand, like, is this something that people are actually gonna care about? If it's not, like, they just don't, like, the players just don't care, man. Like, if anything, players almost get insulted by getting more updates about shit they don't care about. In fact, I've heard this from backers, like, oh, I'm tired of Camelot Unchained. I got the 700th email about the fucking, they drew on some armor or crest or some shit. You know what I'm saying? It's like, I can see that perspective about how it's kind of like, you're wanting to get updates, but you're getting so many updates, and you're just like, these updates aren't doing anything. These are like the kind of updates we used to give people in construction. Maybe that's why it's like negative stigma for me, is I remember like in construction, guys, we used to do these updates where they were called percent build. And so what you would do is you would basically estimate, aka educated lie, about how much money you were to get paid based on how much money and how much percentage of work you had done. So my job, you know, you guys know why I'm so good at sniffing out bullshits, because I was the bullshit originator. One of my jobs was literally to bill people. So I had to come up with like a fucking like detective, like, you know, portfolio to convince somebody that we were worth this amount of money that we clearly aren't worth, and we didn't do that much work in. That happened like literally all the time. It was my job. So I had to basically convince people, A, we couldn't meet the deadline, which is why, like, I wonder if the people that I work with, both, you know, in general and on my game project, realize that I'm like this way. But like, I literally was the person who pushed deadlines back. Like, that was me. My job was to move deadlines, was to like subvert expectations. Like, oh yeah, but something came up, so you know, it's like blah blah, can't do it. Yeah, we're good. Yeah, but we'll get it done next week. That was my job. Literally, it was just like always subvert expectations, always push the deadline back, always be like, oh, like, yeah, we need more time. Like, I was kind of the bullshitter in that case. Like, that's what a project manager is, guys. All right. I didn't want to say what it was, but I was a project manager / estimator, and that's basically what it is. It's a whole lot of bullshit. Construction's really like that as well. It's about percent bills. You just try to bill people for X amount of dollars, as much as you possibly can, and it's just kind of how it works. And then, not to mention, you try to avoid ever having meetings unless you need to. These are other tricks that you have because you don't want to get bogged down in the constant update phase. And that's why I think it's kind of funny to see these developers doing this, because I almost feel like they're having the opposite approach that I had. And maybe that's better for customers, you would think, But the problem being is that it's not like the customers that I interacted with, I didn't interact with them as best as I possibly could either. It's not like every time I talked to them, I had something actually good to talk to them about. You get my point? Is like we tried to minimalize how much we interacted with the customer because we wanted to interact with the customer under good circumstances, right? And if it was bad circumstances, you always had to follow it up with something good. Like we couldn't make the deadline, but da 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 da. So I don't know. Maybe this is just like an opinion thing, but I'm of the belief like keep updates, game updates to like major updates, like Overwatch style, like how they did it, like pre-launch. I thought was really smart. Big videos where you just drop it. But I can totally understand backers wanting to be consistently updated, consistently. You know, actually, this might not even be a problem if there was more MMOs that were successful or launching. But probably because there isn't that many of them, the news cycle then becomes Ashes of Creation's 17th alpha update. You know what I'm saying? Like, so maybe like a bit of that happens as well. Like, I talk out loud and I think, or sorry, I talk out loud. Well, hopefully I would, right? So you guys can hear me. But like, I think out loud. So whenever you guys hear me think sometimes or see me get caught up in my thoughts, literally as I'm talking, that's why. If you're ever wondering, it's because my brain works like this. Like, I literally have to talk and like project my thoughts to think sometimes. So yes, that does mean that I talk to myself if you're wondering. I give no fucks about dev updates unless it's already something playable. I don't care if they added a new texture to a model that week. I like dev updates, but it's a massive update. Or it's a massive update. It's a massive double-edged sword, because at the end of the day, you are fucked either way. Camelot Unchained's updates are so weird. Agreed. And yeah, there's such a thing as oversharing. Agreed. I think there's a sweet spot. No need for progress updates. Test your ideas with the public, particularly the critical designs. And that's the weird thing is like, I've been covering Crucible right now, and Crucible has been interesting to me because it's probably one of the only high-profile like launches I've ever seen where it was like completely lock and key up until launch. And even then, it was still kind of lock and key. Have you guys followed like Crucible's launch? Like hopefully you watched my video on it if you didn't follow it, but man, I noticed that about Crucible and it was like totally weird where it's like it's the opposite problem where they didn't give you any updates about the game. They didn't even talk about the game. In fact, 2 weeks before the game came out was like the first time there's like any footage even shown for the game. So it's like that was really weird. And I say really weird because anytime something like that happens, it just makes me think, why aren't you showing your game now? Right? It makes me think the opposite. If you're trying to just constantly update me to make me like feel the game's coming, I promise you. If that's one extreme, this is the other extreme where it's like, we're not going to tell you anything about our game in the hopes that you just buy it. I don't know. That was the vibes that I got with Crucible. Fallout did do that actually. Well, but they had the early access thing as well, didn't they? No, it was they called it a beta, but it was early access because the progress didn't wipe. That's why people got so pissed at Fallout as well. Updates when it's worthwhile. It's really transparent when devs give tons of updates just to gain interest and funding rather than legit excitement. I agree with that. Isn't it just to build up marketing for it? Yeah, it is, and I think that that's a very natural thing. I think there's arguments about whether or not that's effective or not. I personally don't think oversharing, especially when it comes to MMO players and fans, is really that helpful. In fact, if somebody asked me for my advice, like professional advice, I would tell them do not give 1,700 updates for your game. Come up with a quarterly, like a quarterly as in like each week, like not yearly. Come up with a once a week thing, a weekly thing. Come up with a bi-weekly thing. A developer talk bi-weekly. Come up with a bi-weekly, or come up with a monthly talk. Come up with something that's like regular. People know they're gonna get updates. They know you're gonna tell them what's been going on, what you've been working on, and then just set it like that. That's what I think. But obviously, you know, a lot of people like to just, hey, new news cycle, blah 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 news outlet, cover the fact that we have a Alpha 1755 scheduled for this weekend. It's like that's gonna get lost in the sauce, and I'm seeing it happen more and more. In fact, I've noticed this happen a lot with early access titles that are launching, where they used to be like for like a year long. Like Legends of Arya is a good example of this, where like a year long, it was like this early access title or whatever, like a year and a half or something like that. And then it launches and like nobody remembers that it launches. Why don't they remember, guys? Because they A, already played it, B, probably didn't like it or didn't think it was great enough to remember, and then C, when they go to return to it, they think to themselves, how much different is the game really even? Like, if it's just a couple of versions different, is that enough for me to regrind a character or get back into the game and like fully invest? Like Albion Online, for example? Probably not. So yeah, like I don't think you could ever really convince me that getting a lot of updates is a good thing, but again, that's just my opinion. Maybe some people just prefer to get constant updates. My work style and my style of management is basically only give me updates when it's like critical. Like I'm not trying to tell me every second of the day what you're doing. And I've had bosses and I've worked with people like that. In fact, I got trained by a guy who was like that, where I had to constantly tell him what I was doing, and I hated that. Enough to let people know that you are still alive and working on the project, but not the it's ready when it's done. Now I poof for 800 years, Blizzard approach. Depends on the game. Dev updates should happen every 6 months or before every major update. Yeah, no, I agree. See you later, card. Enjoy your RP event. The more that you hear about a project or a product, the more you don't notice the changes. Totally agree. Totally agree. In fact, maybe that's what I'm trying to say is like, you just don't notice the fun as much anymore. If you're following the news cycle constantly and you're getting just bombarded with updates, it's almost like not as cool whenever you see an update and you're like, wow, that's really cool. Like when you can actually like kind of like chunk them together. Maybe maybe that's just a preference thing. I want to see an update when it's like, wow, this is the update. That's cool. Versus like, what's the update? Huh? You're like trying to read through it and be like, what's useful in this? Oh, they added a different hairstyle. Okay, cool. So different hairstyle, like, yeah. It's certainly a good news or a good way to stay in the news for a very, very long time. That's a good point. In fact, maybe that's why they're doing it. I don't really care for developer updates unless they talk about something game changing or the game goes from alpha to beta. Keep all the concept art, model updates, new animations. I don't care about it. Yeah, see, that's a good point, Pin Zero. When somebody says they're going to give you constant updates and they don't, that's almost always worse than not giving constant updates. Like, isn't that funny? It's like, again, it goes back to like player perception. It's like, you tell a player it's going to be in there, they're going to be like, where the fuck is it? Like, even if it's not good or even if they don't even play with it that much. Like, there's features people have complained about. It's like, nobody cares about the feature. No one's even going to use it, but it's like, you promise it's in the game? Yeah, I expect it to be in the game. Yeah, I think that's kind of funny how that works, actually. Someone tells you, I'm going to give you a bunch of updates. You're like, okay, what's going on? No update? You get pissed off. You're like, where's my update? Right? But if there's not like constant updates and you're not being, told to expect constant updates, you're not going to expect constant updates. Another thing I don't like is when they talk about their design philosophy when it's way too late in development for feedback to matter. So Ulysses, there's 2 points about that I want to make. One, I agree that I hate whenever they talk about philosophy like they're gonna like change their opinion. It's like you're just telling us basically to design. But I also just dislike when people talk about design in a deep way, period, when the game hasn't even shown any kind of gameplay or any kind of like anything really. That to me is annoying because like how is that any different than just LARPing? How are you not just pretending to be making a game at that point, right? Like, I know so many of my good friends who could tell me right now, like on the spot, an idea for a video game. Am I gonna say it's gonna be the best idea ever? No, but they could just come up with one. They could be like, oh, and like, and then yeah, my design philosophy would be, you can, loot Ewoks and go to the planet of Endor or whatever, right? Like, they could probably come up with something as a design philosophy like right away, and like come up with something on the spot, and then I'm supposed to just be like, yeah, oh, okay, it makes sense. It's like, how about like show your philosophy in the game? Because I have philosophies. I even have philosophies for how I would make a game. But if I can't make a game to match my philosophy, then who cares, right? It's like, I mean, the idea of virtual reality MMOs being the norm is awesome, but who cares if it's not realistic yet, right? And that's why we don't talk about them every day. That's why we're not all like obsessed about the next VR MMOs in the same way that we were back when we didn't even know that they existed yet, because we kind of realize now they're way harder to make, and it's going to take a longer amount of time in order to create them in the same way that we want to, or at least we thought that they could have been created in the past. Yeah, I do dislike that as well. I dislike when developers talk about their philosophy like they can change when it's already too late in the cycle for that. And I dislike when they talk about it way too early, in the sense where it's kind of like, at this point, you're just basically telling us your ideas. How is that any different than somebody just role playing, right? Yeah, well, I get told this shit all the time, but people say like, "Oh, well, I had this idea, but then like I never did anything with it." So like, but yeah, I came up with the idea. It's like, well, there's like 700 million billion quadrillion people like you, dude, who came up with an idea, thought it was cool, but didn't do shit about it. So it's like, it doesn't matter if you do. It doesn't matter if you have the coolest ideas for a game ever, if you don't actually like implement it correctly. If it doesn't actually work in your game, right? Like, why did people give No Man's Sky so much shit? And I know it's gotten so much better since then, but like, that's a big reason why. It's like expectations. Like, you said these things, people expected those things. You took those things out of the game, people got pissed off. Thanks for the 100-bit donation, by the way, Heal. I think I missed that. I don't remember if I read that part. Same thing with offering a beta test when it's way too late and it's actually just a hype move. Exactly. It's like 3 days before the game launches, what beta is really happening, right? Like a week before the game launches, what beta is really happening at that point? I feel like MMOs used to heavily rely on freshness and discovery, so I'd say sharing isn't good. But is that still the case with the state of the internet nowadays? I don't know, it depends. Like, MMOs did rely on freshness and discovery, but people talk about that a lot, and I always think people kind of miss the point with it. And what I mean by miss the point, I mean that the internet has always been around, and material on the internet has nearly always been around. Like, I've been reading guides on the internet since I can remember being on the internet. Were they that accessible? No. I think it's more that making a developer content created style of game is literally designed to where if it gets data mined, the game becomes like twice as easy to beat. And that's just because of the game's design itself. Like, here's what I mean. If a game is based on PvP and players being the best in those games, and it actually has like a Shadowbane level of like meta and class and RPG character selection systems, like basically like it has a lot of playstyles. How is like sharing really anything gonna change the fact that at the end of the day, builds are gonna be better than other builds, and rock paper scissors is the game. You get what I'm saying? Like, at the end of the day, yes, encountering a build that you have never encountered would be a recipe for disaster. But I think that largely the fun and ingenuity in the game wouldn't come from playing things that people aren't used to playing. It would come from playing things that do well against other builds. You get what I'm saying? Because like, novelty is a big part of competition, but it's not the only part, and it's not even the main part. So I think at the end of the day, like, a good class to play is going to be respected more than one that had more mystery surrounding it or something. You get what I'm saying? So like, obviously I know you're not necessarily referring to a class as in, or in this context, but I bring that up to state that like, when it comes to figuring things out in a game context, the only way it really becomes negative is basically after you complete it, you can't complete it anymore. So, like, if you're doing a raid and you can look up the blueprint to completing a raid, why is that problematic? Well, you haven't done the raid already, you already know how the raid works, and you already know how to beat the raid in the most optimal way. What if the raid didn't stay the exact same like it was 1999 still? Does discovery matter as much? Yeah, but what if it just has 3 different ways where it changes? Actually, what if it doesn't even stay static, period? What if it's dynamic? What if the boss changes? What if it gets stronger? What if developers evolve the bosses in the game every patch cycle to actually be harder to kill, right? Like, I say all of this to say that, like, to me, a lot of the fun and replayability of MMOs doesn't come from the fact that you don't know as much as it comes from the fact that knowing or not knowing isn't the end of the game. You get what I'm saying? So, like, not knowing how a raid works in WoW is a cardinal sin in 2020. Wouldn't you agree? Because at this point, the raids have been out for a while already. And people don't want to do a mythic raid, especially if you don't know how the raids work, right? So it's like, is it problematic if data mining makes that process easier? Absolutely, because it unravels the very core aspect of what WoW stands for. But does every MMO stand on the same core beliefs and tenets that WoW does? Are they all so reliant on patch cycles, gear scores, and formulaic bosses? No, and that's the thing is like, when your game is more formulaic, it is so much easier to solve with a formula, right? Like, you guys ever like take a math test and your professor or teacher didn't let you use your math equations? You had to remember them. Why would they do that? Besides being annoying, like, why would they do that? Because if you had the formula, it would be way easier, right? Because it's formulaic, right? It literally is formulaic. So you could solve it if you know how the formula works. I don't think MMOs work like that largely. In fact, I don't think PvP works like that largely. It's why I oftentimes talk about PvP so much in comparison to PvE. It's because PvE doesn't have the same dynamism yet that PvP does. And because it doesn't, it makes things like data mining so damn damaging for your game. Because, yeah, if your game is based on clear speeds, beating bosses with mechanics that are very, essentially predictable, and a predictable pattern that needs to be repeated over and over again in order to get the proper gear, well, yeah, people are going to systematize it. People are going to data mine. People are going to tell you the best builds. People are going to tell you the best what rotations. I think that's just kind of a an aspect of the container, if you will, right? The container works that way, so whatever is in the container is going to function that way. But obviously, I'm not going to deny that having the level of wonder in an MMO, in the sense of like, what is possible? I don't think internet discovery necessarily changes that nearly as much as just like maturity as a person changes that. And what I mean is like, when I was a kid, I literally thought in Galaxies I could be anything. And then I learned how the game was actually designed, and I learned that I could only be X, 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 X thing. But when I'm playing the game, am I thinking I can only be 16 professions? No, because I'm feeling it. So I'm thinking, man, it feels like I could be everything, because I'm feeling the feeling of being able to play what I want to play. So I think if I actually knew ahead of time how many classes or professions were in the game, would I have had that same level of wonder to be like, wow, look at all these classes and playstyles? Probably not. But would it have changed the fact that I would have enjoyed the game or still had fun playing the game? I honestly, which is why I've always struggled when Rippies makes this argument, because he makes this argument all the time, completely puzzled as to why I would change that. Like, maybe if you want to be the first to do something, and maybe if you want to like only exploit something to like the umpteenth until it gets patched out, I could understand that desire. But for me, when something gets discovered on the internet, it doesn't change my enjoyment about it. In fact, when I played Classic WoW, I literally didn't read a single guide. I didn't read any guides about the raids or the dungeons. No guides, no dungeons, period. Period. Why? Because I can, first off. People kept telling me, like, that's another annoying thing about people on the internet is like, they create like laws that aren't laws. They're just utter nonsense that people repeat over and over again and nobody examines it further. But that was one of them where people were just like, you have to read every guide in the game. You have to read every raid or no one's gonna like you. I literally at the starts of my dungeons and raids would tell people, hey, I've never done this one before and I don't know how it works. Nobody said anything. Nobody cared. Wanna know why? Because I chose to be in a guild where they wouldn't care, right? Like, I'm not gonna join a random guild and then be like, hey guys, like, I did 0 research after you guys have done all of this prep. Can you let me join your raid, please? Thanks. Right? That's not what I'm doing. I'm saying, hey guys, like, I'm really a noob. Like, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you guys take me along for the ride? Which doesn't mean I'm gonna, like, never learn, right? It just means I don't know now. So, that was a big thing about it. But what I will say is there were, like, weird, like, opinions and, like, kind of, like, feelings I would get from people when I would tell them about that. Like, I'm not gonna say it was, like, a lot of the time, but there was a couple of times where I was like, why do y'all care so much about whether or not I read this guide or not? When this is like a normal, easy mode dungeon that you're probably going to forget tomorrow. You know? It's like, that's the other thing too, is like, it's one thing to be driven towards success. It's another thing to be driven towards success in like easy difficulty modes. That's another thing I just will never really quite understand or comprehend. Yeah, if your game is very predictable, surprise, people are going to predict it. I think that's kind of the nutshell, right? Like, if it's predictable, it's going to get predicted. You guys got to think, like, chess is insanely predictable. Like, people can map out the moves, like, as much as, like, 10 moves ahead at, like, the extreme levels. Sometimes, like, a pro international master or grandmaster level like chess player will literally surrender like 16 moves in. Why? Is the game over yet? No. Why are they surrendering? They lost one piece. Why do they surrender? Because they've already mapped it out and they already know they lost. Even if they do win, they know it's not worth it probably as well, because it takes mental fatigue and fortitude to play chess, and many chess tournaments you have to play as many as like 7 to 12 games. So it's like, you don't want to waste your energy on a game you know is lost already, or you think it has a pretty high percentage chance of being lost already. I bring up chess to say that like raids and dungeons, they have that same problem of being very, very formulaic. And so, you know, that's a big problem people have with chess. And actually I have the problem with chess is it's super formulaic. It very much comes down to like memorizing moves and certain options more than it comes, how do I come up with like a strategy, right? Or how do I come up with like this new tactic? And that's why I think researching is so negative again in WoW. Is like, it's not like you can beat the dungeon in so many different ways, right? Like, there's optimal ways. Like a couple, but like generally speaking, like 2 or 3. Do you think that a game could gradually become an MMO? That's a good question. A really good question. Yes, I do. In fact, it's something I've thought about a lot. I think that that's probably the best way to do it from a artistic perspective, but from a technological perspective, obviously very difficult to do it that way. Yeah, I think that's kind of my point, Pin Zero, is like, maybe that's why, like, when people bring it up as a big problem, I'm always a bit confused. It's like, I've always thought of, like, PvP especially has always been, like, a battle against the developers. So it's like, we shouldn't be complaining that balance is worse now. We should just complain that, like, basically, like, the battle between developers and players is that much more competitive. So it has to be balanced more competitively, right? We're better at, like, catching up to them. We're better at figuring out, like, what's the optimal build right away after the patch cycle comes out. We're more efficient. I think that's a good thing. Deep learning rates. I really struggle to call Elite Dangerous an MMO because you can choose to not play with other people. I don't think an MMO in any context ever, historically, has ever been a choice. Like, what MMO, and like, historically, you could choose to play an MMO versus not choose to play one? I literally don't even know one that exists. You have people who enjoy figuring stuff out, and then you have people who prefer to just execute things as optimally as possible. And then you have people like me who kind of like both. Like, that's the thing is like, I know some people have played MMOs with me, so you kind of know how I play, but like, surprisingly, I don't really read guides. I don't really even watch videos. I don't even learn how to play from people who play MMOs. That might all sound weird. Like, what are you saying? Like, you don't learn? Like, what do you do? Well, basically, like, the idea is that I've played so many of them, I first and foremost trust my own intuition, right? And so what I do is I try to make my first attempt. If I fail epically, then I look up the guides. Then I start looking into, what am I doing wrong? What's wrong with my build? What are the counters to this, right? Like, but I usually, nearly always, prefer and enjoy giving a game my first honest shake. And what I mean is literally just, I optimize it myself. So am I good at optimizing? Of course, I've been playing MMOs for 21 years now, right? Or sorry, 20 years now. I always forget, but it's 20 now. Because I'm 27 and I started when I was 7. So point being is, like, I can kind of teach myself how to play a lot of these games, right? I don't have to rely on other people. But why do I specifically not want to rely on other people? I'll tell you. It's because I think it makes me a weaker player. And here's what I mean. Does knowing what other players do help you performing? Absolutely. Like, you have to know what other players do. But here is where I'm actually, like, militantly, and I mean militantly, like, in a joking way, but kind of like it's a very passionate subject for me. This is where I, like, militantly don't follow what everybody's doing. It's because I know in nearly everything I've ever done competitively in my life, period. Video games, martial arts, fighting, you name it, sports. I've always succeeded and had success when I don't follow what everybody's doing, right? In fact, I actively do the opposite of what everybody's doing. So if I see the meta as something, the first thing I think is, how do I beat it? That's the first thing. I'm one of those players, personally. I'm not thinking about, oh, the meta, like, I'll pick the build. Okay, now I'm going to pick the next build. The first thing I'm thinking is, so this is the meta build. Let me create a build that's literally designed to beat that build. Why do I do that? Because statistics. I know that if that's the meta build, it's probably the most commonly played build, which means if I come up with the most common counter to the most commonly played build, it means I'm beating the majority of the players now, right? And the same thing applies for me in jiu-jitsu, where, like, I have a very non-typical game in jiu-jitsu, right? Where I don't like to play the very standard way. And the reason for that being is that, to me, everybody plays standard. Everybody knows what the standard jiu-jitsu way is, right? Like, there's a certain kind of mentality. It's like pressuring, it's passing the guard, it's like getting into the dominant positions, like in mount and stuff, and like getting to those positions, right? And like, that's like the typical way to play. The problem is that when you learn the typical way, if somebody confronts you with a non-typical way, unless you're so grounded in your typical way, like, and I mean really grounded at, like, at a top level of effectiveness, a lot of the time, just being surprised is enough to lose. And remember when I talked about earlier, like, novelty isn't enough in a competitive context to win? It isn't at the highest level, obviously. Like, the people who use novelty things to win competitions aren't novelty players. They're really talented, they just used a novelty tactic, right? Novelty players don't make it to the international master level, like, pro level competitions, right? It just doesn't happen. Like a pure cheese player doesn't make it to the top of StarCraft, right? Like it doesn't happen. Like you have to play standard eventually. So playing standard, you always have to have the ability to play standard if you're going to be a non-typical player. So like me not playing standard, when I say that, it doesn't mean that I'm like, I don't know how to play standard. I don't know what playing standard means. I don't know what the Holy Trinity is. I don't know how to counter the Holy Trinity. Of course, I know what all of that means. What it means is that I'm not as focused on what everybody else is playing. I'm more focused on what I want to play, and what I want to play is the counter to what everyone else is playing. Like that's just always been the class that I find the most fun. It's just the one that's like does a good job of beating the thing that everybody else is playing. And so sometimes does that mean that I just pick the most popular class and then do that? No, like I do have to pick a class that for me I can feel like enjoyment playing. So I can't pick the most effective class just because it's the most effective class. I've tried that before. I'm a little bit too temperamental of a player to be able to do that, but yeah, no, I think that to go back to my point about it's funny, like Steak MCC, that was a good question. You got me ranting, but it always gets me thinking because it's such a common thing in MMOs. It really is. Like the meta is in every MMO that you can imagine, right? It's like the meta's in life, period. But like every MMO you play as an RPG has a meta or something, right? And I just love I love studying people, like civilizations, how people interact with each other in video games and MMOs and conflict and war and conversations and sexual like escapades and relationships. Like I just like to study people. People are interesting to me. And when it comes to like how people handle MMOs and play MMOs and how they navigate the meta, if you will, that's very interesting to me. I think it says a lot about a person. Where society as a whole is designed around the idea of a meta, right? That's kind of what society is. It's the meta. It's like the thing everyone else is doing. It's like societal expectations, I should say, if I use English correctly. There's societal expectations. That's kind of like the meta, right? The funny thing is I'm not a very meeting societal expectations kind of person. Like both my career, both in my life, come from, like the kind of person I am. I'm a night owl. I don't like waking up early. I don't fetishize working hard. I don't fetishize working long. Like I'm an atypical person by many measures, right? So naturally, yeah, it's fun for me to break the meta versus like follow the meta. But I think from a thought experiment perspective that you guys and all of you will find more ingenuity and you learn more about yourself when you push your boundaries, I would say. So it's like if you find yourself playing MMOs and you only read guides, and I used to do that too. That was me. When I was a kid, I was that player. I realized something. The guides suck. Seriously, the guides suck. In fact, Limpos is in chat. I've talked to him about this exact thing. So, Guild Wars 2 has a site. I can't remember the name. It's like Guild Wars 2 meta builds or some shit like that. Dude, I was on meta builds, and is it meta battle? There you go, meta battles. Thank you. It's called meta battle. I go to this site and I'm reading like the meta builds, and I'm just like, so like, why are these meta builds? Was my first question for many of them. My second question is like, are people actually reading this and then picking these builds? Like, are people playing Guild Wars this way these days? Because like meta builds back in the day had like 1700 counters. Meta builds these days are just like, here's the meta build. And so I had a field day when I came back to Guild Wars 2. Because literally what I did is I looked at the top ranking abilities or builds, and Limpos can back me up on this. I literally told him, I was like, wow, there's no Condi removal in any of these builds. I'm going to make a Revenant Burning build. I'm going to make a Necro Burning build, and I'm going to do really well. I did. Whenever they brought in 2v2s, I was literally winning 1v2s. Like, my teammate would die, and my burning necro build was winning 1 versus 2s in that game. Now, mind you, I was a former pro player in that game, so clearly I was a good player. But like, exactly. Well, we weren't the first person to figure that out, Limp Boss. Is the better question, because you were playing your Mirage build as well. Like, clearly we're not the only people to figure that out. But that's kind of the point. Is like my first day coming back into the game, immediately the first thing I did was completely disregard the meta, and I had immediate success from doing it. But not everybody can just disregard the meta, right? You have to know how it works, actually. And there's a saying, actually, I think Bruce Lee, I'm going to butcher it, but there's a saying Bruce Lee has, which is basically like, you have to learn the rules before you can break them. Like, that's true in martial arts. Like, you have to, like, when people teach you in martial arts, they teach you, like, put your hands here, like, you have to be in your headquarters. Like, your hands need to be here in headquarters. Do you ever really see people fight like this? Not really. Like, why is that? Isn't that the first thing you learn, is putting your hands here? How come you don't see people fight here? It's because they teach you to put your hands here because you need to always return your hands after you strike, so it becomes a habit, right? So you need to constantly remember to return my hands to my chin because it's my resting place, right? If I didn't return my hand to my chin, then it opens up the opportunity for someone to be able to strike me, right? And I have to, obviously, I don't want to get struck, so I have to be careful about that. So if I don't understand even just the basic meta, then yeah, like, playing whatever meta build is literally a waste of time. And I think that's the other point on this as well, is like, what is the point in playing meta builds if you don't even know how to play the game? Like, just period. Like, don't even know how to play the game. Like, I found this happen to me in Dota. So to shit on myself a little bit, I'm not a very good Dota player. You know, I've been a League player most of my life, not a Dota player. And I remember I would look up guides in Dota and shit, and like buy the items, and I'm just like, what do these abilities, like, what does this even do? Like, I could not understand what I was building. And so, like, what I started doing, actually, especially talking to some of my friends in Dota, they were like, dude, don't build this item. You're too, like, low elo. Like, you're too new. Like, just build this, you'll be good. I did. Sure enough, I had a lot more success. Now, am I a good Dota player? No, I'm still shit. But the point being is, like, in that case, I actually needed somebody else to tell me, hey, dude, you're not playing the game correctly. Because you're following the meta when you don't even know how to, like, deny your CS properly. Like, why are you caring about what the meta builds are when you don't even know how to play properly, right? So, and I think actually, Alundra's, funny enough, that was another problem, is I was literally using an outdated build. But that's a whole nother conversation. There was the whole so Fly Turmo, there was a whole shebang over data mining, uncovering a few mechanic attack names in the latest Ultimate fight in Final Fantasy XIV. Even though the World First groups wouldn't have known what some of the newer names did, it gave the slightest bit of advantage, knowing some semblance of what to expect. Comparing to other mechanics earlier in the game, with the same name, they got slammed with saying they cheated. Ah, okay. So I remember hearing about that. I didn't know that was why, actually. Yeah, I would agree with that, Limpos. There's a stark difference between uh basically telling somebody this is what you want versus being able to create what you want. You know? It's like so different, those two things. Like, I know friends, like, I would go to them for any kind of advice about their opinion about something, because they have really good taste. Now, would I actually ask them to make that thing for me, or like to, like, you know, work with me on that video or something? Probably not, right? Like, because maybe they don't have the, like, actual, like, history or, like, knowledge to work with video editing or something like that, but they know, like, how it feels because they've watched a lot of videos, or they've seen so many YouTubers who are talented, or like whatever else, right? Also love that this curl today is like basically like a weapon. I'm like looking at it in the camera, like he's flying all over the place. Look at that. Final Fantasy XIV is a unique case because they avoid sharing information with players. See, that is a bit of a unique case, because I don't think a WoW is the same. Like, don't get me wrong, WoW gets data mined all the time, but they're pretty upfront with their information. I feel the same way. I dream of a game where the PvE encounters changed based on progression of the players in the world. And I just don't mean how well geared they are or what level they are. The reason I love PvP is because other players are evolving alongside me. Exactly, Ulysses. In fact, that's what I love about D&D. That's what I love about RPG PvE. Like, MMO PvE needs to catch up to, like, real tabletop RPG PvE for that exact reason. Because, like, I have never, ever, ever in any of my D&D encounters ever had an encounter where after I had an easy encounter, the next encounter was super easy as well. I've never had that happen, guys. Why doesn't that happen? Somebody just tell me in chat. What's the simple reason why that doesn't happen? Why don't I encounter the same easy encounter again? There's such a simple answer. And it's been staring us right in the face the entire time since MMOs have been basically created and rose from the ashes and I guess like pioneering legs of muds and shit. It's the DM. Right? Exactly. It's the DM. Because the DM could just change it, right? It's boring. Well, it is boring, Heal. That's a good point. So the DM's going to change it. Who wants to play something that you breeze through? Nobody really wants to play that, right? Like, you want it to be progressively more difficult. Not hard mode, progressively more difficult. The funny thing is that it actually is that simple of a solution, Limboss. Most MMOs have difficulties. So they kind of already agreed with it. They just did it in a more arbitrary way, which was just like, here's an easy mode, here's a medium mode, here's a hard mode. Instead of being like, well, this boss actually gets harder as you do better with it, for example. To me, that's obviously more dynamic, but it's a lot more interesting than hard difficulty mode versus normal mode versus, you know, whatever mode. Like, that shit already exists. Difficulties have existed in MMO raids since, like 2006 or 7 is what I'm remembering. Like, pretty far back, hard difficulty modes have existed. So people have always wanted different difficulty levels concerning raids and stuff. So why do it so arbitrary as in a mode? Why not try something a little bit more innovative? Like, maybe you can change the location of the boss. Maybe you change the way or angle at which he does a projectile attack. These things are very easy to do, actually. Very easy. Because remember, this is done in a sandbox instanced area, usually. So it's not like I'm having to worry about performance as much. It's not like I'm having to worry about all the other players and areas that are going to impact my performance. No, it's literally one zone that I can customize exactly how I want to. Now, let's say I spent hours and hours coming up with this awesome zone, like Molten Core, or wherever. Like that's a bad example because I came up with it pretty quickly. But like, where, like, what's the what's that really cool damn it, it's the Scarab one. Is it Ahn'Qiraj? Ahn'Qiraj? How do you pronounce that one? The Scarab fucking? Is that how I pronounce it? My pronunciation's horrible, so. Okay. Yeah, that, yeah. Yeah. My pronunciation, yeah. I got it. Oh, it was actually Ahn'Qiraj? Ahn'Qiraj? Okay. Alright. Well, thanks, guys. I'm surprised. I am surprised. My pronunciation's absolutely horrible. Okay, I'm Scottish Mexican. Give me some leeway, okay? Nobody, not even my own people can understand what I'm saying. So. But no, I think that it's a lot easier than you think. Changing the location of a couple of mobs in a zone literally could be as simple as just dragging and moving things. Like, it's that simple. I'm not going to say that that's enough to make the raid play vastly different, but some raids actually would play very different if you just move the mobs. Like, for example, Onyxia, I can make arguments right now. You can make Onyxia more challenging by just changing the path. Just change the way that Onyxia flies. Just change the angle at which it flies. Move you into the eggs on purpose. Right? Like, there's ways that you literally... Like, it doesn't... Like, one thing you do, Limpos, a lot is it seems like your rhetoric is that we can't figure this out. Like, can you really not figure that out? Like, you couldn't, like, move Onyxia just a different direction? Like, you couldn't think of, like, a single instance in which that would make it more fun to play it again? I don't know. I get what you're saying in that it's not as easy as just being, like, make another raid or make it harder. Like, duh. Like, if it was that easy, then we would already have better raids. But sometimes it literally is just as easy as like, okay, let's have a thought experiment. How do we make Onyxia more challenging? Well, it literally goes in the same exact predictable flight pattern. What if we just changed it? Right? Like, what if we just move the pattern? You don't think developers are capable of doing that with their own tool set in their own game, in their own world? You don't think they could change, like, the health on a character? You don't think they could add another minor boss or a quest line? Just make a raid a little bit more exciting to do again? Or they couldn't, like, do it to where now you're doing the raid from a different side or perspective? Like, of course. They could change all of this shit. They could literally make a new raid, right? Like, with the same exact assets. Not even having to make new character models. Literally the exact same assets. But will they do it? Do they see the value in doing it? To me, those are obviously the more realistic questions. And I think that that's the thing that people have to understand about myself is that I argue from the perspective of the consumer always first and foremost, no matter what. Because that's what I'm interested in protecting. You guys, the consumer. But I also talk from the perspective of the industry. And to me, those are different. So saying that I want a full loot game is different than saying the industry wants a full loot game. Right? Saying I want Guild Wars 2 to have more of a PvP focus is my opinion. Is that what everybody else feels or thinks necessarily? You see what I'm saying? So it's kind of like sometimes you guys might get me confused that I'm making arguments as the industry or I'm making arguments as myself, but I try to always specify either my opinion or when I'm trying to talk about something more generally. Because the truth of the matter is I know that my interest is not the exact general audience, right? Like, even if I make my argument that there are MMO audiences, which are the Fox audience, the fake audience, even if I make that concession, I'm still atypical amongst atypical MMO players, right? I know that. So I don't go tell people in their game, for example, y'all should make PvP the main focus of your raid-centric game, right? Because I like, maybe I want that, but I know from the industry perspective, that's not really that helpful, right? I'd rather them make raids better. So like, that's why like here I'm arguing, really, if you wanted me to argue my perspective, I'd argue do PvPvE raids, right? Because that's my favorite thing like ever, is I love PvPvE raids. I love that compared to a PvE raid versus a PvP raid. WoW doesn't really do those that much, so I'm not going to make that argument. Instead, I'm going to make the argument, if you're going to dedicate yourself to the raids, fine, you've done that for decades now. Why not make cooler raids, dude? Y'all raids suck. Like, I'm sorry, I have to say it. I have to be the guy to say it. I know other WoW fans, y'all tiptoe around this shit. Y'all love the game and stuff, and y'all love the raids. Nobody else is really making cool raids besides Final Fantasy 14. Can I be the one to say it? I think all the raids in 2020 kind of suck, dude. I think they do. I'm not saying the story. I'm not saying you can't have fun. I'm just saying, like, in terms of, like, innovation, what they offer, replayability, they're kind of shit, man. Imagine if you bought a raid as a video game. Here's my analogy. Imagine if you bought a raid as a video game. Who the fuck is going to think that's worth the money? Who is going to think a raid is worth the money? Of a box price? How could it be worth the money, though? What if you gave players the ability to have a foundry system where they could customize and create their own raids that would be voted on by the community and then picked for that week community raid by developers? I don't know, that sounds like innovation, right? But like, that's the thing is, like, if you're going to keep doing the same thing with the same triggers, with the same instance, with the same, you get the gear piece here, here's the same mechanics repeated again. Yeah. Data mining is going to ruin that experience. There's going to be power gamers. Yeah. Not everyone's going to get the same experience because there's going to be a hard difficulty versus an easy difficulty. There's going to be problems of that model. My solution isn't get rid of it. My solution is keep that model, but keep it in multiplayer online RPGs, which are more lobby-based anyway. So make it more lobby-based. Fully commit to being a lobby-based game. But why don't we also start making MMOs that actually have raids? Like real raids, like Ashes of Creation style raids, where, like, that's one thing that's got me excited about them, if I'm gonna talk about some of their hype a little bit here, we were talking about shitting on hype a little bit. Let's talk about some hype. I like the hype in Ashes of Creation. Why is that? Because they have open world dungeons. I've been asking for that forever, right? Like, since I can remember, I've been asking for open world dungeons. Why? Because the content makes itself. You don't have to make a new dungeon or a raid. Someone just gets killed in a dungeon, and next thing you know, we have a conflict going on. We have content being created dynamically. We don't have to make another raid. We don't have to make another dungeon, right? So I think that that's really what I want to see for the MMO world, is some innovation in the PvE world, just period. Like some innovation, like a sliver of innovation in the world of raids. And if there isn't any, then I'll full disclosure, your genre, your type of game, your style of play, it just isn't for me. If it doesn't change, then maybe it just isn't made for me personally. Because like, I believe it could be better. I believe we can do way more than what we're currently doing and what we've been doing since Project 1999 EverQuest, right? Like, since they invented the original raids, right? Like, we can do more. We can definitely do better. Until PvE players start admitting this shit, though, I try to honestly stay on my side of the fence. Which is like weird because I'm not even a PvP-centric player at heart. I was a role player first. Then I became a PvPer after the fact. But I almost stay on my side of the fence because I feel like nobody's backing me up. Like, it's kind of like when you're working in a company and you're like, man, we should get paid more, right, guys? I'm quitting, right, guys? And like, nobody else quits. Nobody else is like saying it. And you like turn around, you like just quit. You're like, oh shit. Like, that's how I feel a lot of the time that I'm like arguing for better raids. Is I'll get arguments from people who like the same old raids, basically being like, we like our raids. And I'm just like, all right, I guess you guys are just not for your best interest in the terms of like the genre. You just want more of your best interest, as in you want more of the same kind of thing, which fair enough, but that's never going to be interesting to me. League would be a bit more accurate. Those games at a high level are over after the first kill. Dota right now is just a meme where Secret destroys everything. Yeah, I totally agree, Lysis. In fact, I just downloaded Age of Empires 3, but I think that's actually why Age of Empires has so much replayability, is there's so many variety of play. There's so many ways to play the game. I can't tell somebody only spam elephants and that's the only way you play, because you can't spam elephants with every other class, right? Or every other civilization. Oh, just spam those like Chinese machine gun archers. You can't if you're not playing the Chinese in the game. So it's like it does force you to have some diversity. And in fact, that's why I've been really big into RTS and also turn-based strategy games lately. More like getting 40 players to actually show up for a raid. Yeah, that's true. Best way to play is before there are guides out. You could just not watch a guide. Read a guide. Like, why is that never a solution? Why do I never hear anybody just say, like, don't watch a guide, don't read a guide? Literally my answer. Like, and I'm not trying to be weird here, guys. I literally get puzzled when people, like, mention that shit to me. I'm always like, can't you just not read it? Like, what? Like, cheat codes exist. Do you just always use the cheat codes for every game you ever play? Or do you choose not to use the cheat codes because it kind of ruins your play a little bit, makes it too easy? You know? Obviously, having information isn't a cheat code, but it's like the same concept of like, get information beforehand. It's gonna make it easier. 100% easier. So, I don't know. I guess I could see it from the perspective if you're playing LFR or LFGs, then yeah, I'm assuming pretty much everyone you play with in that context is gonna either read the information or expect that you read it. But that goes back to my argument about pickup basketball, which is that don't expect a good quality group from a pickup group. It's literally like illogical to assume that, because the only thing you have in common is you're playing the same game. Like, you might think that that's enough for people to want to work together. It's not. Like, people will find the dumbest reasons not to work together. Panda winning the Tekken final was pretty funny. Oh, who's Panda? Oh, Panda the character. I remember Panda. How long has Panda been in? Since like the third game or some shit? It's been a while. Panda definitely wasn't in the first one, though. Or the second one. I don't think so, at least. It's been a while since I've played Tekken, but I used to play all the time. The famous meta. Get a job, get married, have kids, grow old, and die. The famous meta. I've actually thought about dyeing my hair, Limpos, but I don't really know what I would dye it to. And curly hair, I feel like, doesn't look as cool when you dye it. Oh, I followed guides. That's the funny thing. Is just like, I'm Mr. Like, you don't have to follow guides. But as a kid, I followed guides like religiously. But it's because, like, look at the games I was playing as a kid. I was playing like Majora's Mask and fucking like Dark Eden and Galaxies shit. Like, you bet your ass I had no fucking clue what was going on. You bet your ass I had to read a guide made by some guy that was probably like 35 and I was like 7 or 8, 9 or 10. You know what I'm saying? Like, I grew up playing MMOs when it was mainly older people playing them. So yeah, it's I needed guides literally to even play these games, period. That's why I guess I've always just had that perspective of like when people are like, guides ruin everything. I'm just like, well, if they do, then don't read them, A. But like, if they ruined everything, like, y'all must fucking hate me, dude, because like, how the hell did I even play games without guides as a kid? Honestly, I don't know. I don't know. Without Alakazam, how would I have ever gotten my Mustafarian fucking injector on Galaxies? I don't even know how to do the quest line. How would I have ever gotten my commando armor? You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah, Game Facts. Oh, Game Facts was how I beat Final Fantasy 7 and 8 and 9. And I keep going. Like, yeah, no, I lived off of guides as a kid. Lived. Like, every game I played, I had a guide. And maybe that's why I'm just not that way anymore. If it seems like I'm extreme about it, maybe hopefully the context explains more of it to you guys. I think I just realized, you know what? It was cool playing games like that, but let's just like go in like completely like not knowing what's going on sometimes. Let's not even watch a trailer of the movie. For example, like I don't watch trailers anymore really for that reason, because they ruin literally the entire movie. So it's like, as weird as it sounds, knowing less does make your enjoyment better, but knowing less makes you more likely to make a bad choice. So it's kind of like, you're damned if you do, damned if you don't. You have to take a risk. I'm glad that you were able to make it in normal society with your particular attributes. I am too, General Vicinity, and I'm pretty surprised I was able to, honestly. um, but yeah, I think without the internet, I wouldn't have been able to. That's for sure. Without guides, like I'm not even memeing any. Like without guides in the internet, yeah, I don't know how I would have been able to survive in my society, especially coming from where I'm from, which is like people didn't even have computers where I was from. So like when I was still playing, like not when I was still playing, when I was younger, I should say, when I was playing PC MMOs for like the first time, people at that time didn't even have PCs. Like I had some old shitty, you know, Dell or whatever that could barely run a non 3D game, you know? Like, but like people didn't even have PCs, period. And so when I would tell people I played PC, they literally would look at me like I was weird. Not because I probably was, but like, not because I was weird in that context, but just because they hadn't even played PC before. They didn't even have a PC. Back then, the library was where the PCs were. So like, you were still going to the library to have a PC. Most of my friends didn't have PCs at their houses. So I was lucky enough, even though I was a poor kid, that For some reason, my grandpa just gave us his old PC. I don't know why, he just did. So we kept his old PC when he got a new one. And without that, I would have never had a PC. I would have never been basically who I am today. And I don't mean to get all morose, but I don't know how I would have even lived without a PC, to be honest. Because when I was the most depressed, video games was the only thing that kept me going, basically. Yeah, that's a good point, Limpos. Sorry, scrolling up, seeing what you said about the power changes. That's actually always been the problem in Guild Wars 2, is because there isn't a holy trinity. Power is almost infinitely going to be better. Like it's so hard to like balance that, in my opinion, because like you can cleanse completely conditions with a single button. You can heal to full in a single button, realistically. You can't heal your teammate to full in a single button. You know what I mean? Like, unless you have Guardian Book or some shit. Like, there's like extreme examples, but like largely, yeah. Power almost from the beginning was always going to be better. Which I know is weird because I always talk about condition, but I think condition is good because it's harder to use. But that doesn't mean it's better, because technically if power is easier, then it's better, right? Because more people are going to use it, because it's way easier to pistol whip somebody or whatever build, Deadeye snipe somebody than it is to Condi stack and break their heal and cancel their Condi removal or whatever else. Nowadays, there are veteran players that can't and won't think outside of the box in most games and just worry about living and dying by the meta. I do agree with that. There's a lot more meta soldiers than there used to be. I don't know why. Maybe because the games are just more accessible these days. But yeah, there wasn't as many meta soldiers back then. And what I mean by that is like, there was a lot more feuding over the meta. Like, something that hasn't existed in MMOs in a while, in my opinion, like, at least in my personal experience, has been the meta wars. You guys remember meta wars? We used to literally have people fight and argue on the forums over meta builds. Like, what build was better? It wasn't like, oh yeah, this build's better. Okay, yep, we all accept that, like it is these days. Like, that happens so much. People just accept shit even when it's not true. Back then, it was like, you had to have a 17-page essay to back yourself up. Like, let me see the damage chart. Let me see your damage numbers. Do it with armor. Do it without armor. Try it with the, like, there was always like caveats you had to add. Like, the nerds back then were ruthless. They expected you to have all of this shit to be able to say like what's considered meta. Because back then the forums were the main way that we were, talking to each other on the internet. So you had to literally make builds that were going to stand up against other people being critical of your build. I think that's why builds were so good back then, was like we had more of a culture for it. We were always fighting over like builds and what's better and this is like this versus that one. Like, that's how you come up with like, the meta, basically. You have to test it. You needed the noob tube. I actually did use the noob tube, funny enough, in COD. I don't know if you remembered that, Steak MCC, or you just randomly said that, but I was an annoying ass noob tube player. In COD. And all my COD friends hated it, but I didn't care because I was a Halo player. So I was like, I come from a game where you have rocket launchers and shit. Like, I don't care if you guys complain about me noob tubing, y'all. Equally so. It's oftentimes a simple solution in contrast to actual new developed content. Sorry. I thought my interest was similar to most players till I played New World. 9 out of 10 players never flagged for PvP, and I met quite a few people who would never. Yeah, maybe because I've been playing full loot MMOs since I'd say the first full loot MMO I played, I probably played it in 2009 or 10, somewhere around there. And the first time I played a partial loot MMO was Dark Eden, which was like my first. Fucking 90 or 2000 or 2001, something like that. Yeah. Somewhere around there. Maybe 2002. a little bit later. And I'm very aware that people don't like to flag. In fact, because I obsess about this shit all the time, I've always wondered how come some games have better PvP than others. And the simple solution, or rather the simple reason, there's not a simple solution ever. The simple reason is just because there's a reason to flag, basically. If your game doesn't have a reason to flag, full stop. Like, that's all you need to say. If there's no reason to flag, nobody's gonna fucking flag. Right? Like, nobody's gonna do it. It's been proven so many times. Like, I try to tell people in New World that too. Like, if you just have a flag system and you think that's enough to get people interested, or a 10% experience, whatever the fuck buff, like, it's not. Like, you have to build a system around it. People are not gonna flag for nothing. Like, they're just not. It's too much of a psychological risk to get like beat and like, and like your ego gets crushed. Like, people don't want to go through that for nothing, for no gain, for no fun. Nah, no way. Again, I do martial arts, guys. I see people on a daily basis not like martial arts. So I'm very familiar with people not liking conflict, period. And that's the truth. Like, not trying to say if you don't like PvP, you're a coward. But in reality, most of the time people don't like PvP. It's just because they don't like conflict. It makes them uncomfortable when someone beats them. It makes them uncomfortable when someone shit talks them. It makes them uncomfortable when someone beats them without their choice in the matter. Like, it's a lot of people dislike conflict. And so how do you make conflict more accessible? That's what PvP is about to me. Because maybe there's players like me who will do the full loot, like, hardcore, yeah. But not everybody's like that. In fact, very small percentage of players are like that because very small percentage of players are murder killer type players, you know? Raid maker, exactly. Exactly. It could work, man. I believe in it. Didn't D&D MMO do custom instances content with a ratings board? It did, and so did Neverwinter Nights. They got rid of them. I wonder why. Star Trek Online had it too. Got rid of it as well. I wonder why. Because they're making you buy character packs and quest packs, and they're trying to make money, and they don't know how to make money off of letting players make their own content yet that much. Not in MMOs yet. Well, they have kind of in some ways. Like, EverQuest and H1Z1 have allowed players to make items and then sell them in the game. So, like, some cases they have, but largely, yeah. I don't think developers have figured out how to make money off of players making their own content yet. At least it doesn't make enough money. Because you have to think, developers want you to keep paying monthly, whether a subscription or whether just however much money you're spending on the shop. Are you going to want to spend money if you just keep paying for, or if you just keep making your own content? Well, I think the one way to fix that is to make it a subscription. If you pay subscription, you get access to the raid maker and the dungeon maker. Solved. By the way, you guys don't even have to pay me for that idea. You can just take that, just like with all my ideas. My hair's so long, it's like tickling my nose. I need a haircut. I don't mind having my hair longer, but it's too long right now. Sure. Sea of Thieves has open world dungeons if you want to get a crew going sometime. Yeah, I guess they kind of do have open world dungeons. The last time I had played the game, it was so easy, so hopefully they made it harder. I think the reason that people don't say that because in multiplayer, not having the same basic information as everybody else is detrimental to your team. Oh, you mean when people just admit, like, not knowing information? Yeah, I would probably say it's not very common, because people were surprised that even I admitted it. It's kind of sad that MMO group content kind of requires you know the content prior to doing it. Yeah, no, it is, and I am all over chat, speaking of which. Try playing video games in a language you don't comprehend. Well, I've done that a lot, but probably not as much as you or any of the other foreigners in chat. Because I played a lot of Korean and Japanese games growing up. Like Dark Eden actually was a Japanese game, or rather, Korean game that had a Japanese server. So I was pretty used to playing non translated games. so I could basically figure out how to play those games without even reading what they're saying. But yeah, I don't recommend that, man. It's hard, especially MMOs, man. It's so hard to play a game where you can't read what the fuck you're saying or doing, or like when the whole point of the game is based around like making your character, you know? Death Stranding promo material spoiled nearly every plot point. Yeah. That pisses me off, man. I just hate that trailers have basically become the game now. Like, or the movie, or the book. You know, it's just like, now, like, the hype basically shows you, like, what you're gonna watch. I see it with vlogs a lot. You guys ever watch vlogs? Like, I'll watch a vlog, and the very beginning of the vlog these days, on, like, most vlogs I watch, is basically, like, a 1 minute, like, highlight of what the vlog is. And I'm thinking to myself, like, I will never, ever want to watch that. Because why the fuck am I even watching the video in the first place? Why not just, like, make a video that's, like, 1 minute long and call it the highlight? Just let me watch that. Because it doesn't make money, duh. But, like, seriously, like, I hate watching highlights in the very beginning of the video. I'm, like, do you not have faith I'm gonna watch the video, buddy? Or, like, what's the deal? Like, you think I was gonna click off already? Like, can you just, like, explain the premise and let me watch the video? Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm one of those people. Yeah, well, conditions in a Pin Zero, you made the point about conditions. You disagreed kind of with Limpos's point. I think Limpos is primarily talking about non-world versus world. World versus world is so problematic with conditions because of the ability to spread so easily. But he is right about spreading being a counter to counters of conditions, and that if you spread somebody's conditions, even if somebody cleansed it, if you can spread it again, it just reapplies everything. So like there are ways around getting people to cleanse conditions, but like for example, if someone just does like a well of power, it literally just starts taking conditions off bit by bit, which is problematic. It's even worse than just like moving the conditions around. Cleansing them in Guild Wars is worse than transferring them, because transferring them as a Necro, you can just transfer them back, right? Because that's the whole point. Or like as a Revenant, you can just transfer them back. But like the problem is that you can't. So you end up, after you get cleansed, all of your conditions are gone. And the whole purpose of a condition spec is to tally up all of the conditions on the enemy so they get overwhelmed by them. So as you can see, literally all they have to do is have one person have one spec where they put a one well on the ground or one little guardian barrier or whatever the hell. I forgot which one cleanses conditions. The fire thing. And then boom, all the conditions are gone. Yeah, that's why condition specs require a team built around them versus power. You can do power in anything. You can do power in conditions. You can do power in power. Power is a lot more well-rounded because it doesn't have to stack anything really, right? It doesn't have to. It's not tempo. Actually, maybe that's the best way to put it. Is the reason why I like conditions in Guild Wars 2 is it's tempo based. Tempo playstyle, for those who aren't familiar with card game terms, is kind of like, it's very much like momentum. Like you get one move, and once you get past a certain move, boom, you go for it, and then you have it like, and you've got it. Maybe that sounds kind of like, couldn't you just say the same thing if you're bursting somebody down with burst DPS? Not necessarily. Like, are some power specs in a game, and power specs, by the way, for those who don't know, it's just like, think like physical attack power. Like condition specs are going to be more tempo based because there's conditionals that you, no pun intended, there's conditionals that you have to beat. And what do I mean by a conditional? Well, you have to know, does your opponent have a cleanse? If they do, you have to play around that, right? Do they have a heal? Does their heal get rid of conditions? You have to play around that, right? So it's very much like, if this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. So to me, that's more tempo based. Whereas power can be more like, you can literally just burst somebody down with a single combo, and boom, you've got them with a shatter combo. That's more about timing, right? That's more about like timing. Boom, you got to catch them at the right moment. Conditions is like consistently catching people. You got to keep catching them. So I prefer that spec more because it's less like it's more consistently demonstrating your skill, I would say. Have you seen the lazy peon video on Crowfall from like a month ago? His criticism of some mechanics or of some lack of features, AoE looting, pulled on some annoying strings for me. Asior, funny enough, Lazy Peon's video, I did watch it, and his criticisms are basically like besides the criticism about the AoE looting and some of the other specifics he mentioned, which I didn't mention that, but his opinion about the animations and how everything doesn't look like it's like there's enough proper hit feedback and stuff like that. You guys can watch my podcast episode from when I first invented my podcast and I made my first episode talking about Crowfall. I literally made the exact same points. So I say that to say not that, we're the same, we make the same points. I say it to say that that was like 2 years ago. They have not really gotten that much better. Not enough to me. I will say they have gotten better, Limpos. I don't think it's enough. I think that's the problem. They have not gotten better enough. Like, to me, they literally haven't even changed some of the animations. The floatiness, they haven't literally changed it at all. Like, to me, it's the exact same it was. Other thing is, like, particle effects. Completely, utterly impossible to know what's going on the screen. That's been there for, like, 2 years. Oh, you talking about because they didn't let you hit while you were moving, Pin Zero? I thought somebody said that you're allowed to hit while you move again. Oh, you're talking about mirages? Damn. I'm so far behind. Do you know though, Pin Zero? People like PvP when the odds are undeniably on their side. Yeah, world versus world PvP is always going to be made up of people trying to find the uneven fight because the uneven fight is the more winnable fight. When you have a good MMO in my eyes is when you have a good MMO in your eyes is when um you I would say when there's a chance for the less populous group to overtake the bigger group. That's when you've got good gameplay in your MMO. Now, you could argue the opposite if it's too much in the other direction. And that's why I guess I'm struggling with it is like it's not as simple as just being like, well, then make it to where outnumbered people should always be able to win a fight. You can't do that because then all the best players are just going to group together and all the casual players are just going to get shit on by the best players. So it's like, okay, well, you can't do that. Well, then make it to where Zerging is like the main way to play the game. Oh, shit. Can't do that either because then that creates the problems of like, well, then everyone becomes just like a number. And so it's like, you can do both. Let me first say that. But I guess when I'm saying like, you can't do both, I mean it in the sense that like, it doesn't just solve all of the problems. Like just choosing one doesn't just solve all of the problems. Like, one thing's for sure, you have to support the players who are outnumbered because they can't always feel like the only solution is to have more people. But you also can't solve the solution for the people who have more players because they're less skilled by just saying just bring more players because that also brings problems with it. So like in a sense, I think the hardest thing to balance is how many players versus the skill level of the players are involved in the PvP. And honestly, there's no easy solution. Like there's like 12 solutions for that, Like there's not like one. There's like 12 solutions or some shit. It's hard. You learn how to read with the Pokemon Blue version? That's awesome, man. That's great. Unfortunately, there's studies that prove that people are more likely to go see a movie that they know it's going to happen in. And see, Yondelar, I don't honestly dispute that at all. Like I don't know for sure if like you're telling the truth, like if there's a study to back that up. But I guess what I'm trying to say is it's utterly believable. Like 100% believable. It's always why I've known I'm kind of weird. Is like mystery is my favorite genre. So naturally, you can imagine what do I not want to have spoiled before I go see a movie or a game? Like any guesses in chat? Like, what do you guys think I wouldn't want to get spoiled before I go see a movie or a game? Like, anything really. I don't want to get anything really spoiled because I like mystery. Like, literally, the most fun thing for me is figuring something out. Like, any kind of detail, I don't want to know any details, Pin Zero. I'm a detective. Like, I obsess over solving these things and solving plots and solving stories. If I get any little kind of detail, I'm not happy because it ruins my perception. Because like I literally predicted Shutter Island because I saw one of the trailers. There was like a scene in the trailer where like Leonardo DiCaprio like does something or whatever else. And I remember I see that and then right before they did the big reveal, I had this weird like guttural feeling where I was like, "Wait a minute. In the trailer there's this part where and I hate that I do that, guys. That's why I don't watch the trailers. It's not the trailer's fault as much as it is my own fault as well. Like I'm just that way. Where like I remembered like whenever he was in the lighthouse, and then I was like, oh fuck, dude. No. Have y'all seen that movie or read the book? I was like, no. Damn it. And that was right before they just revealed it to me too. So I was like, that would have been cool if I got that revealed to me, right? Like, how cool would that have been? To be like, oh wow, like the whole time he's this blah 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 without spoiling it. I'd have been like, shit, dude, that's awesome. That was probably the whole point of the movie, right? To get like surprised. Well, when I get clues, I don't get surprised anymore because I start like intrinsically, I can't help it. I just start solving it. Like I've been doing mysteries since I was a little kid, so anytime I get a hint about a movie, my brain immediately tries to solve what the plot is. I hate it. Like I hate it and I love it. It's like weird. Like I love it about myself because it's like so addicting, especially when you get it right, and it's so fun to do. But I hate it because sometimes it's also like I don't want to solve things. Like I literally don't want to solve things. I just sometimes I just want to go in and just be like, wow, like I'm so surprised. But I'm just like, fuck, I saw this little thing and I like Heavy Rain is a good example of this. Where I had the killer spoiled for me. And in fact, even if the killer wasn't spoiled for me, I would have had it spoiled for me anyway because of a certain detail that somebody mentioned that I noticed whenever I was playing the game. That is a small detail. It was about the typewriter. For those who've played the game, you know what I'm talking about. I noticed the typewriter and immediately I was able to solve it. So like sometimes literally for like people who are good at solving shit, all they need is just a single little clue. Like I love playing Taboo, as you guys can probably imagine. And Taboo is very much that way. So yeah, I excel. Like if you give me a little hint, I'll figure out what it is eventually. So yeah, that's a big reason why I kind of realized I was not the typical moviegoer or even video game goer because if something is predictable for me, I completely lose interest in it. And I think it's why rating is so boring to me. Tempo sounds like my pre-change Mordekaiser playstyle. All right, I finally caught up, I think. Yes, I finally caught up. Just put friendly fire at least. Sure. Did I figure out the mystery in Myst? I actually haven't played Myst all the way through. Oh wait, is this a different game? No, this isn't Myst with a Y. Sorry, I thought you were talking about Myst, like one of the most iconic adventure games ever. Um, I haven't played the Myst yet. Wait a minute. The TV series? I don't think I've heard of it. What platform is it? For reference, if you guys want to know how much of a nerd I am, detective-wise, I've watched all of the Sherlock BBC episodes, and the first 3 episodes, I solved all 3 of them. The next 2 of the 3rd episode, or the 2nd season, I solved those, and then 1 of the episodes for the last season, I solved that. So yeah, I feel confident bragging about that, because your boy can Sherlock it up with the best of them, right? So if you guys haven't seen Sherlock BBC, try seeing it and figuring out who the murderers are and how they did it ahead of time. Or just go watch Detective Conan, which is kind of the purpose of the show. I think it's why I got good at it, by the way. I've seen, like, I don't know, a little bit, like, just, you know, I watched a little bit of mystery. I watched, like, 777 episodes. So, yeah, I've had a little bit of practice. But my issue with Sherlock BBC after the first season is that no longer does it become about mystery anymore. It just became a drama. And it was a good drama. I liked it, but they stopped caring about the mystery. Like, and what I mean by that is that I have a big pet peeve where, like, I need to know if the mystery in something is solvable or not solvable. So is it linear, or, like, are you going to give me the ability to actually figure it out? So, like, I hate mystery games or shows where they're just like, and then you figure out the mystery all along was the janitor. Dun dun dun. And it's like you get no information, no clues. You don't even meet the janitor character until the very end. And then you're just like, that's the mystery? The whole premise y'all built for a guy who wasn't even involved in the plot? Like, what? I don't want to see this shit. I want to see, like, you know, is it involved? Is it this guy? Is it, like, someone who knows him? Like, you know, like, it has to be somewhat related, right? True Detective Season 1, I'll say it was better at that than most, but probably not the best example. But I'm also, again, I'm very critical of mystery stuff, so expect me to be a massive nerd about it. I think even introducing characters can ruin the mystery. They can, depending on the story, actually. In fact, again, to tell you guys how fast, like, people who like to solve mysteries can solve them, when I read J.K. Rowling's Cuckoo's Calling, I solved it literally after the first chapter. Like, again, I don't like to tell you guys how or what, because I don't want to spoil the stories, but if y'all don't fucking care, then I'll tell y'all. But essentially, like, for anyone who has a lot of experience reading and consuming a lot of mysteries that are actually designed to be solvable, so you learn, like, logically how to look for clues, how to question people, how to see if someone's telling the truth, like, all that kind of stuff. Like, if you get good at that kind of stuff, it's honestly very challenging to watch a lot of typical mystery movies, because what you realize is in those mystery movies, there's no clues. You can't solve anything. It's only a mystery because it's a mysterious. Woo. But it's not really a mystery. Like, you're not like, oh, this person went here, so he must have talked to this person at this time, which meant he couldn't have been in the cab at this time. Right? That's Agatha Christie's Murder on the Orient Express. But it couldn't have been here because of the blah blah blah, the person here, and right? That's how you solve the crime. Versus, like, well, it was the janitor. You know, like, I hate mysteries like that. So yeah, like, to go back to your point, general vicinity, getting introduced characters early on, literally, you can solve mysteries because of that. Because you have to think, you're not in the story. So I'm not the detective character in Cuckoo's Calling, which means I'm not dealing with this, like, for the first time. You guys get what I'm saying? Like, I'm dealing with this from the perspective of I'm reading it, which means I get a lot more information than I otherwise would have. You get what I'm saying? So it's like, to solve a mystery from a book or a movie or a show is so much easier than solving a mystery in person. Duh. Like, I could look at all of this stuff. I could see it, you know? Like, it's there's a lot more tangibility there. But sometimes really all it takes is just hearing a behavior, connecting a dot. Like, I'm gonna spoil Cuckoo's Calling for you guys. I won't say the characters or anything. Basically, one of the characters you encounter really early on ends up being the killer. Now, why did I think it was this killer? Because he was the least likely to be the killer. Literally, that's the only logic I used. No, nothing else. No, I didn't read about it. I didn't see who the killer was. Someone didn't tell me the killer. I didn't come up with like the Sherlock fucking BBC like episode to like explain. Well, so here's my deduction for how I. Literally, it's just like sometimes it's the simple logic, right? It's just the simple logic that solves it. It's just like, well, not this thing, so probably this thing. Sometimes it's like you solve mysteries without using any details from the mystery itself, you know? You just kind of solve it with your logic, I guess, if you will. So in that case, you know, when they introduced that character, they were like, here's this character. You know, it's not guesswork, because guesswork sounds like you're not being educated about it. If you guys ever watch me play Mafia, and by the way, Huel watched me play Among Us my first day. He bought me the game. Literally my first day, first game, I won the game. Like, that's a true story. Like, Huel can tell you. Like, this is a real story. I'm actually good at those kinds of games. Now, why? Right? Because they're all pretty much related to the same kind of shit. It's educated guesses, and it's making reads off of people. And so, like, for example, how did I know it was the killer in Cuckoo's Calling? How did I know it was that guy? Well, first off, they're trying to figure out who the killer is. So clearly the killer is going to be involved in the plot in some sort of way, right? In some sort of way, right? So I can use, well, I'm probably going to meet the killer at some point during the plot, right? To tell a story. And then they kept telling me, oh, well, it couldn't have been this guy. It definitely couldn't have been because of this logic, because of this logic, because of this logic. I've already read so many Detective Conan mangas and seen the episodes. I know anytime somebody keeps telling me it can't be this person, I don't believe them. Because the first thing I'm thinking is, why is that the case? Why are you so damn sure? Why are you so sure? Why are you so damn sure about it? You know what I'm saying? So it's just man, mystery is so fun, but it's such a hard thing to quantify to people because it does come across as just guessing sometimes. But I could tell you, it really is a lot more than that, even though I can admit it is guessing sometimes. Like, that's the confusing thing, is like, I've had hunches and I've won games, for example, of like Mafia, where I literally just had a hunch. No, like just completely utter hunch. And I was right. Do I think that that means anything or that's like the norm? No, that's just a guess. It's just like, right things aligning at the same time. Like it's other factors that come into play. It's not like I'm such a galaxy brain that I just solve everything, you know? How did I find Secret World? I really liked the Secret World's world story. I liked that it had a sense of urgency to it, was puzzle based, and had a whole narrative built around the three factions. I still want to kind of outline that unpredictable rating example that Final Fantasy did to spice things up from their usual formula, but I don't want to spam it. How can you solve Sherlock when it's all magic? Well, I'll give you a good example. So the first episode. I'll spoil the first episode, because if you guys haven't seen Sherlock's BBC in the first episode at this point, alright. I mean, I don't know what to say. I'll tell you exactly how I solved it. So, there's literally an exact quote where Benedict Cumberbatch's character, Sherlock, says, it had to be, like when he's talking about who the killer was, he said it had to be somebody that nobody would notice. Literally, as soon as the words came out of his mouth, I immediately knew it was the taxi driver. Like, literally immediately. Like, as soon as he said it had to be someone that nobody would notice. As he's exiting the cab, immediately I knew it was a cab driver. So that was how I figured that one out. So you can figure this stuff out because Sherlock gives you clues in a couple of the episodes. There are actual clues. For example, like the poison, the how the person died and was transported in the taxi was also strange. It had to be someone that they didn't notice, but they had to be friendly enough with it they would maybe not think they're that suspicious, especially if they were to drive them to a certain location, right? So a taxi driver, very effective person to kill someone for that reason, right? So that's why I was able to deduce essentially that it was the cab driver. But I'll have to remember the other mysteries off the top of my head because obviously the story in BBC's Sherlock is different than actual Sherlock. You know, Hounds of Baskerville or etc. Sign of Three. The stories are actually a little bit different in those, which is kind of a little bit of a cheat code because I know kind of the concept of some of them, so I can, like, for example, I obviously was able to deduce Hounds of Baskerville because I read it already. Like, that's cheating because Hounds of Baskerville is very, that one and Lord Blackwell, those stories are very magical. So if you don't actually like know the concepts of them, they're designed to trick you. Like, they're literally designed to make you think, was it magic? Because that's the whole point that Sir Conan Arthur Doyle was trying to do, was like, he wants you to be like, is it real? Like, was Blackwell really magical? Like, have you guys seen the movie? I think they did a movie with Robert Downey Jr. Was Blackwell really magical? Was he killing these people with magic? That was you were thinking that the whole time. You're like, damn. And then the Hounds of Baskerville, were these giant demon hounds like really terrorizing people? Obviously, no. The whole purpose of Sherlock is to be like, it's not magic. Here's the reason. You know, like, I agree, Hasior. It wasn't that good of a puzzle solver or riddle solver. The thing is, they did hide some clues from the viewers to make Sherlock seem more smart. Yeah, and that's actually why they do it, is like, it's a plot device to be like, only me, the amazing detective, can solve the detective mystery here. When it's like, but you never even gave us the information, so we never even got a chance to try to solve it, you know? That's Obi. That's so true, dude. That's so true. Obi87 says, in TV series, you can 90% of the time see who the bad guy is by how famous he is. That's so true, dude. In fact, like, I figured that out in, damn it, I can't remember what show it was. It might have been Person of Interest. But they had, like, one of the characters in from White Collar. And I was like, okay, he's kind of a famous actor, and he was kind of a bad guy before. He's definitely going to be a bad guy. Sure enough, he was a bad guy. You're just like, okay, you saw that coming. The other players were praising him, asking if he was a pro in the deduction. Yeah, so like that game. So I'll tell you guys this story before we leave today. I'll tell you the story of how I won. Well, the story of how I won my first Among Us game is not that exciting, unfortunately. I was just one of the imposters. Nobody really did a good job, so I just killed everyone by myself. So it wasn't that crazy. It wasn't any crazy story, but the last game that I won in Among Us was a really funny story. So, and I would love to do a community game, by the way, Huel. Two of my friends actually asked to play, so maybe I'll figure out a time that we can all play on Saturday or something. Because yeah, I have a couple of friends that want to play with us. But anyway, I'll tell you guys the story of my last Among Us game. Then I'm gonna say goodbye because it's been like 2 hours and 40 minutes, and I've said hello to you guys long enough and answered some questions and stuff. Good to see you guys, by the way. And stay tuned. The Anarchy Online Death of a Game is coming out. That's still gonna happen. And yeah, that's because Hasior, my best friend, he's actually like a TV whiz. Like, what I mean by TV whiz is like he knows like every obscure show, and he's one of those guys who has like a 17 different, you know, hard drives and stuff, and like, yeah, he has every show on his hard drive. So yeah, he is the one that mentioned it to me. Okay, so anyway, the story goes, I am actually one of the imposters, and so very early on, I get caught near the dead body in the game. So it's me and these other two guys. Now, the funny thing is these other two guys end up blaming each other because I took one of the guys' side on purpose. Now, that's something that I do is when I think that I'm potentially going to be considered guilty, I look for somebody who's considered more innocent, and I try to associate with them, or I try to basically say like, hey, you're legit. I try to confirm them, which makes them feel like I'm more legit, right? Because if I'm confirming somebody, I can't be the imposter, right? obviously one of the easiest tricks that you do as the imposter is you confirm people, which basically means you know who to kill. You know who's not the imposter already. So when other people are confirming people, you have the explicit knowledge who the imposter is, which means you can do something with that knowledge. What could you do? Well, if they're saying this person is the bad guy, all I have to do is just agree with the other guy. And that's what I did. I agreed with the other guy, and I just said, oh, the other guy's legit. I don't know about the other guy. I didn't see him, but I know this guy's legit. So sure enough, the other guy said, all right, let's do a 50-50 vote. So they vote him out. And in the next round, they're like, all right, now vote me out just to make sure, because it had to be one of us, right? And I was like, yeah, it had to be one of you guys. Meanwhile, the whole time, I'm like, it was me. Well, I'm like, yeah, it had to be one of you guys. You know, for sure. So it was 50-50. Yeah, let's vote him up. So we vote him up, and of course I'm going around and I'm killing different people. And it gets to one point where there's like 3 or 4 people left. And so at this point I'm like, well, this guy was sus. We know it's probably not this guy and me. So like, why don't we say that this guy who was suspect, I'll just say that what did I say to him? I forgot what I said exactly. But I said, oh, to vote that guy out because he was also suspicious. And so at that point, they didn't really believe me, sorry. So I was like, well, damn, how can I do this? And I was like, you know what? How about this? Vote that guy out. Then tomorrow, call a vote. And then we can vote the next person who's suspicious. That way we won't get a double kill or we won't get another kill. Right? Well, it's like nobody did the math, dude, because there was only 3 people left. And one of those was the imposter. So after the 4th person got killed and he wasn't the imposter, that meant that now it was 3 people and I was the imposter. So it's one of the, I wish I recorded it because it's one of the funniest ways I've ever won in any kind of Mafia context. I literally convinced the other 2 players to just stand there and wait for the button to become available so they could push the button to start the deduction or the voting or whatever process. Anybody assume what I did before the button went available? There's 3 people, so what do I have to do to win? I just have to kill one of them. So I stood like next to one of them acting like I was waiting for the button, and he realized it when it was too late. So he started running and I chased him, and just like at that point it was obvious I was the killer. I just chased him down and murdered him, but it made me laugh because it literally was as simple as me being like, oh, let's call for a vote tomorrow, don't worry, we'll be safe. That's when you sabotage reactor. See, the funny thing is I didn't even rely on like playing, because it was like my 2nd or 3rd game, so I didn't really know the mechanics of the game yet. So the only thing I was doing was I was sabotaging every now and then further away from where I was, just so people can kind of feel like maybe the killings were happening where they weren't happening. But my strategy largely when it comes to playing Mafia games is not being the psychopath super killer guy. What do I mean by that? I try not to lie as much as possible, actually. In fact, I try to play as dumb as possible. And it's kind of why whenever I play with my friends, they usually vote me out first if they think I'm suspicious. Because they're just like, you're not worth keeping alive. Like, you're a good player, and unfortunately, when you're a good player in Mafia, you get killed first a lot. But a lot of the time, I just try to kind of agree with people, you know? Like, I don't try to grandstand and here's my big Sherlock deduction, because I don't think that kind of reasoning really works with everybody in the same way. It might work with, like, me. Maybe one of you guys, like, want to hear a Sherlock deduction, but, like, how many times have y'all gotten a Sherlock deduction from somebody only to basically get tricked into, you know, voting for the wrong person? It's like, there's other ways to make people really want to vote for somebody, and I would say it's not as effective to rely on logic, even though you need to make logical arguments. It's like making logical arguments that affect the feelings, right? So like you could tell somebody, I know you were over there. You're making a demanding claim about them, right? It's like, I know you were over there. Of course they're going to get mad and be like, no, I wasn't over. So you can start this like whole, like, it wasn't me. Just because you're like, oh, but it was you. What is it? And another one that people do all the time is like somebody won't talk for like a second, and somebody's like, oh, it has to be you because you didn't talk for a second. It's like, Well, I mean, people get nervous first off, and second off, just because you don't immediately respond doesn't mean that you're not guilty, right? So a lot of the game aspect of Mafia is more fun to me than the game itself, right? It's like making a read on somebody. I don't know, the way he said that, he seemed kind of suspicious. Like, all of that is more fun to me. It's kind of sad that Unfortunate Spaceman came out a couple of weeks before Among Us got big. Spaceman has more complex mechanics and even has a story mode. I haven't heard of it, but I'll look it up now that you mentioned it. I also haven't really looked into politics prove that emotions over logic. Honestly, it's true, dude. I feel so bad saying it, but it's so true. Like, I used to be Mr. Logical Player when I played StarCraft, Mafia on StarCraft, and I realized like people didn't respond to that well. If anything, people voted me more because they're almost like, bro, you're a nerd. We're going to vote you anyway because you seem like you're just too much of a nerd. And it's like, but like, I'm trying my best to be good at the game. It's like, yeah, you try too hard, basically. Like, no joke, I would get voted out because I was trying so hard. So I started to have the approach of not trying so hard while trying so hard, like secretly. And that seems to be my best approach so far. So if you guys play with me, never trust me over there in that corner being too quiet, all right? Then again, you shouldn't trust me talking too much either. You should probably just vote me out first. Actually, don't, because then it's not fun anymore if you just keep voting me out first. Like, there was a game where I was playing with Huel, and he killed me early on, and when he killed me, I knew he was like, I have to kill him now. This is a good opportunity. And I didn't blame you, dude. I didn't. When you got me that one time, I was like, fuck, good one. Like, I don't take it personal. I know what the game's about. Unfortunate Spaceman is also free with game reference cosmetics as a business model. So every other game vote you off early. Well, see, that's the thing is like, I find when you play online, it's much easier to not have that happen. In person, even though I think in-person Mafia is like way better, it's much easier to power game and metagame, dude. It just is, man. Because like, think about this. Let's say you have 10, 6, 8 of your good friends and y'all play Mafia all the time. If one of you are clearly far and away the best player, you're telling me that if someone's suspicious of them, they're not going to vote them day one. They're not going to kill them day one. Come on. Whether you're Mafia or not, think about it. When you're Mafia and you know that a top player is not Mafia, you want to kill him early because you don't want that guy to catch you. Same thing applies the other way around. So that game is so interesting, but there are a lot of issues when it comes to kind of like metagaming. It's so easy to metagame compared to I feel like it's harder to metagame D&D because you can change things more, you know? You could just say, well, that sword doesn't work because of this, that, and this. And Mafia, it's like if you caught somebody, you know, giggling when they shouldn't have giggled, then you got them, you know? Even though, like, it's not you didn't catch them in a lie. You just basically got them laughing when they shouldn't have laughed or something stupid, you know? Anyway, Among Us is a really interesting game. What I would love to see is MMOs having some maybe some ideas from those games and even maybe some mini games from those games. I think that would be really cool and interesting. If there's a guy who keeps track of people on cameras, I try to finish them all. Yeah, like the cameras thing is kind of like, it's almost like the in-person argument equivalent. It's like the person who's just sitting there making like visual reads the whole time. You can do it, but it's kind of like, isn't that kind of cheating, you know? Like, not cheating, but you get what I'm saying? It's like a little cheesy. Not cheating, but cheesy. Because you're just making like visual reads. What are you gonna just like, if someone moves their chair whenever it's nighttime, you're gonna know it's them. You know, like people do that, fair enough, but it takes a bit of map knowledge. Yeah, so I don't know the maps at all. So, dude, people let me get away with having no map knowledge. It's funny, like, as an excuse, I could say all the time, like, oh, I don't know the map. And people fall for it literally all the time. It's true. I don't actually know the map. But like, I can use that as like my plausible deniability. When someone says like, oh, it's in medical, I'm like, where is medical again? Is that left or right? Because I really don't know. But then it also makes it easier to like hide when you're like, oh, I don't know. All right, well, I'll see you guys later. I'm going to head out. This was a nice, almost 3-hour podcast today. We shot the shit. We talked about Among Us, talked about a lot of other things. In fact, I was going to talk about more, but honestly, I'm tired and hungry now. So I'll talk more next week about where I'm going to end up in 2 years, because there's new wrinkles in the plan of where the Nerd Slayer Detective Boy is going to be moving and basing his global internet operations out of. And the hint that I'll give you guys is tapas. But anyway, I'll see you guys later. Thanks for stopping by and joining me. As always, good to see you guys around. And I will see you guys next week. I can't wait for both Death of the Games. We have 2 lined up for this month. Anarchy Online followed by Crucible. Crucible is going to be shorter, but I'm working on it right now, so that one will be coming out next week sometime, I'm sure. What other content? I think that's pretty much it. So yeah, see you guys later. Peace out.